Stay with us on RS3 and listen to VLN2, the second round of the dedicated long-distance championship around the Nürburgring Nordschleife. I'm Bruce Jones, and I'm joined by Paul Truswell. And Paul, delighted to see this morning that unlike VLN1, there is not fog hanging over the circuit on the Nordschleife. It's a beautiful morning, and the fans have turned out in their droves.
Absolutely, yes, and it's good to see, because it's always nicer to race on the Nürburgring when the weather is good. Forecast is also good, and the entry is fantastic, Bruce. 193 cars on the provisional entry list, which I think there was 160 on the entry list for VLN1. So you can tell that people are thinking Nürburgring 24 hours. And this is often the nice thing about the early phase of the VLN season, because people are very much more interested in it. And I'm really looking forward to this one, because the circuit, as we saw on the screen a little while ago, looks absolutely beautiful. It's a great entry, and we're going to get a proper 4-hour race this weekend, as opposed to the last one, which was 2 3/4 after the delays and things they had earlier on.
Yes, it feels like you've gone out for a run and never quite hit top pace, because all your plans before an event are aiming for one thing, and then when they're interrupted, they're delayed at the start, and you don't get into your full gate. But just touching on the Nürburgring 24 hours, of course, massive focus for a lot of these teams, but just the fact we've got KCMG, for example, concentrating now on this championship, even removing themselves from other racing series to focus more and more on the Nürburgring. So great to have teams from the Far East coming out to play, and fans all over the world like to see those GTR Nismos, don't they? Fabulous things.
It's a funny thing, because beginning of the year, when the VLN announced this change to the BOP, and reduced the SP9 cars, the GT3 cars, by, what was it, about 5% of power, taking them about 15 brake horsepower down on the straights, upset quite a lot of people. And the Wochenspiegel team, Monschau team for the Ferrari, Rinaldi Racing, decided they didn't want to play anymore. So they actually kind of extricated themselves from the VLN, and there was a lot of doom and gloom around. And yet, as you say, KCMG is showing an interest. You've got Hyundai coming in with the Veloster, running as a new TCR class car. That's going to run as SPX rather than a TCR class car. But I think that's going to be nice and exciting as well, to see how much interest there is in the VLN still, despite all the little tweaks and changes that have gone on.
Yes, when I'm trying to think which driver in particular was really throwing the toys out of the pram about as early on, but it settled down, and as you say, 193 on the provisional entry list, more than 20 GT3 cars at the front end of the field, SPX in there as well, as you mentioned. But just looking down the list, absolutely fantastic entry. And we've got a little flurry of rain has just arrived as the cars are going around on their formation lap. And talking of going around, we've had a spinner, but spinner not a sinner, managed to get it going again. That was number 285, which is a Manheller Racing Toyota GT86. No damage done, but in fact, looking at the shots, it looks like the temperature's come down as well. I was trying to work out if that was rain that was almost snow. It was the Miltech Motorsport GT86 going around. But again, with slightly long shots, suddenly what had looked a glorious morning in the Nordschleife is now looking a little bit trickier. Already, of course, the start drivers in their cars going around to the grid, but on the Grand Prix loop, not the full Nordschleife bit, that is where the rain is falling. We'll look at cameras further around the circuit, but it's hail. It's turned to hail, so that will give you a guidance as to the fact it's just on the warm side of snow. But as Paul, you've been to the Nordschleife many times, you get many sorts of weather. In fact, you were even staking it out last weekend.
I was doing my homework last weekend, yes. For other reasons, I was in the area, and it seemed an opportune moment to go down and avail myself of some tourist laps. Quite a bit of the circuit's been resurfaced, not since I last been there. I think the whole place has been resurfaced since I was last there, because that was about 20 years ago. But coming through the Hatzenbach and down towards the Fuchshole, there is some new surface down there. But you're right, the weather can be very fickle in the mountains. I said earlier on that it was bright sunshine. We saw bright sunshine. The forecast is for continuingly changeable conditions, actually, for the rest of the afternoon, with some possibility of some sleet, and as we saw, some hail there on the screens a moment ago. Now, I think, hopefully, the problem is with weather like this is that because temperatures are fairly low, the temperatures are barely 4 degrees centigrade, so fairly low temperatures. So any moisture which does come down is going to mean that there's very little grip around, and really an opportunity for people. Another car off on the inside on the Grand Prix loop there.
Car 91 shared by Friedhoff's Alex and Max, but again, these cars are going back on the circuit, but it just shows early in the season, early in the lap, early in the day, maybe they're trying to compress all the sorts of weather you might have in the Nürburgring 24 hours into this 4-hour race. But whereas 2 or 3 minutes ago we saw rain coming down a little more heavily at the kink, going down effectively behind the paddock, it's light rain rather than heavy rain. That's easy for me to say, though. But, number 91 did actually suffer some damage, and it looks so it's cracked against, this is the Porsche we're talking about, the Friedhoff brothers' car. Left-hand side rather tattered. Looks so that's actually clashed with a tyre wall rather than another car.
Yeah, some smoke coming as well from that front left, but I think it's probably just where the bodywork's rubbing against the tyre as opposed to any damage to pipes or radiators up at the front of the Porsche there. But yeah, it's not the sort of thing you want to do at the beginning of a 4-hour race. So the Friedhoffs will possibly just be coming straight back into the pit lane. This is on the Grand Prix loop, so they can come back into the pit lane, and this is still opportunities for them to work on the cars in on the grid. But yeah, I don't reckon the track is getting wet at all. I think the main issue is cold tyres, Bruce.
Yeah, no, I would concur with that. I keep staring at the screens trying to work out if it's actually just changing to snow.
Yeah,
but
it's water.
Yeah, water coming out of the side of the number 91 Porsche, so that's not good. You thought it might have got away without snagging a pipe, but I think a little bit of compression to the front end. Let's just talk you through the front qualifiers. Fastest car was the Monteplast number 29 Audi, shared by Christopher Mies and René Rast. Just a whisker.
Who set the time.
Exactly, just a whisker over 8 minutes. 8 minutes, 0.076 seconds. Cars still leaving the pits. And that put them just slightly clear of the Falcon Motorsport BMW, shared by Peter Dumbreck and Jens Klingman. And keeping the variety going, Car Collection put their Audi with Frank Stippler and Pierre Caffer third on the grid. And Stippler's going to be a busy boy. He's also down to drive the car that qualified fifth, which is the Phoenix Audi. So
it was Caffer who qualified the number 32 car, the Car Collection car, and Stippler was in the Phoenix car during qualifying earlier this morning. So Stippler finishing up 4th and 6th, but it was actually the 6th place car that Stippler was driving. Pierre Caffer, another Nürburgring specialist, going very well indeed in the Car Collection car, which I suspect is going to be predominantly Fred Vervish and Pierre Caffer, and I suspect that Stippler will concentrate on the Phoenix car. For there are only 2 drivers down on my list to drive the Phoenix car, in addition to Frank Stippler, Vincent Kolb being the other driver.
Other manufacturer variety, a Mercedes in 6th on the grid, the HTP Motorsport car, Maxi Goetz, Christian Hernadel and Lance David Arnold. Conrad Motorsport Lamborghini, so often a feature in the last year in particular, with car number 7 that is, and that's got Michele Di Martino and Tom Coronel. So plenty of variety there. But BMW looking strong, and 12 months ago they won VLN 2 at Rover Racing. Conor De Filippi and Jesse Krohn. De Filippi was on good form, finishing 3rd in the opening round this year, so still got a handle on the circuit. But I think a big factor today is simply going to be what sort of weather comes our way and when.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the good things about the VLN 1 race, Bruce, because it was this 2 3/4 hours compressed event, was that it meant that the team's normal kind of strategy was thrown up into the air a little bit, because they're used to the 4-hour races. They're used to it being a 3-stop race. They're used to it being, let's say, 28 laps, because normally we get about 28 laps in 4 hours. Whereas the first round was something a little bit different, because it wasn't that. It was only 2 3/4 hours.
Yeah.
They had to select a slightly different strategy, and it meant that they could be a bit more choosy about when they came into the pits and how much fuel they put in at the pit stops in order to try and do things a bit more cleverly. So I think in some ways, having that race as an earlier was a good way to start the season, because it means this is the first proper 4-hour race, and we're going to be seeing probably 7 lap stints, and as I say, that'd be about an hour per tank full of fuel. But of course, remember the rules in VLN: the longer you go on your tank full of fuel, the longer you have to spend in the pit lane. That's the way the regulations define the minimum pit stop time. So the pit stop time is dependent upon the stint that you've just finished, except for the final pit stop, which is dependent upon the distance to the end of the race. So we'll see how that one pans out. And as I say, it is going to be 4 hours. Bruce.
Weather report, important to have people on the ground out among the trees. It is actually snowing at the Nürburgring. Thank you very much for David sending that over on Skype. At present, it's melting. Hopefully, it stays like this. No, hopefully, it warms up and we get a dry circuit. But they're going to have a look on the inspection lap, apparently, and just check if there's any snow anywhere on the track. But I sort of feel that should be part of the deal. If you're racing in the VLN, you take what comes your way. You've got a challenging enough circuit, get on with it. But that's just me being rather Spartan about the whole thing. But anyhow, so they're going to investigate that. Thank you very much for David for letting us know. Do keep the messages coming.
So the leaders of the championship at the moment are the combination of the key team that won the first round, because 23 starters there were, I think, in the SP9 class. It was certainly the most populous class, and because, again, the way the points work, you get more points in your class if there are more cars, more starters in your class. So Nicky Katzberg, Marco Wittmann and John Edwards currently leading the championship by virtue of having won the first round outright, but also because the SP9 class was the most populous class. That is not the case in this weekend's entry list, Bruce, because I think it's the BMW M240 Racing Cup class which is the most populous this time, which is the Cup 5, he said.
Yes, I'm quickly shuffling papers to find the nomenclature.
Actually, no, there's 22 in Cup 5. There's 27 cars in the V4 class. So within the V4 class, that is the most populous. And so that will be scoring the most points if you can win that class. That's for the 2 to 2.5 litre production cars.
Effectively, BMW 325i's, that sort of fills that class. So, ready for kickoff at the top of the hour, and just again waiting live shots to see if we can pick up snow anywhere else around the circuit. But earlier in the day, when it was sunny on the grid and everyone was thronging around, people sitting in the grandstands, not having to huddle up, it all looked quite good. Coffee in hand, just taking in the sights, and no sounds at that point, but just the scenery at the Nordschleife, waiting for it to kick off, and suddenly the images are rather grey. More people seem to be wearing black jackets up and down the pit lane, and the whole demeanour appears to have fallen away somewhat as we prepare for this event. But hopefully we'll get the full 4 hours, and very, very much looking to that. So 12 o'clock Central European time, 11 o'clock if you're listening in the UK, or the top of the hour, effectively. Top of the next hour, wherever you are on the planet. So just over half an hour remaining.
Unless you're in India or one of those places.
Oh, yes, the half-hour difference.
Have a half-hour time difference as opposed to a whole-hour time difference.
Yes, I very nearly got caught out by that. Right in the southern tip of Argentina, there was a half-hour time change, and I'd been around for ages ahead of waiting to catch a coach, and I very nearly missed it, despite a sort of 5-hour standby. And,
well, the other car that I wanted to pick out, we were talking about it a little bit over breakfast, Bruce, is the other car running in the SPX class, the 52 numbered Black Falcon Mercedes. It's got Adam Christodoulou, Thomas Jaeger and Dominic Baumann as the driving strength, but they're running as an SPX class car, despite the fact that it's a GT3 Mercedes.
So it's a GT3 Mercedes, but not as we know it. Is that?
But not as we know it. Yes, quite. All I can find out is that they are testing some parts that are not homologated, which is why they're not running as a GT3 class car. Now, this is me now speculating what that could possibly mean, but it doesn't make any sense at all, to my mind, to be testing things for 2020. At this point in the season, what you want to be doing is to test things for the Nürburgring 24 hours. And so I suspect that whatever Black Falcon are up to, they've got an eye on the 24 hours. And as far as the car homologation is concerned, I think that can only mean tyres. So it may be that they're running tyres which are not in conformity with the VLN regulations, and therefore they will have a little bit more flexibility, and they'll be looking at how these tyres wear over a full hour stint and how they perform relative to everybody else. Now, conditions clearly not very suitable for testing tyres because it's freezing cold. But anyway, it will be interesting to see how the Black Falcon Mercedes goes. Chris Delulu qualified the car 9th quickest on the grid, so he'll be lining up on the 5th row of the grid. Alongside him will be Rudy Adams at the wheel of the number 35 Falkenhorst BMW. And so we'll see how the Black Falcon Mercedes gets on. Meanwhile, at the front, it's going to be interesting to see the battle between the pole position car, which was pole position at VLN 1, Chris Meese and Rene Rast with the Monteplast entered or sponsored Lant entered Audi R8. And they sharing the front row of the grid with the Falcon Tyres BMW, the M6, Jens Klingman and Peter Dumbreck. Falcon Tyres sometimes very suitable for Nürburgring type conditions, aren't they, Bruce?
Yeah, you suddenly see, and also what's great is that they run 2 different makes of car, and if it's working on both of them, that really is the proof of the pudding. But just one thing a little bit interesting there, Paul, I was just looking at a long shot down to the starting grid, thinking, yes, it's definitely snow, and then I saw it actually not falling, but rising in front of the camera, because I was trying to look for wind conditions. In fact, almost no wind at all when you look at the marshals standing at the side of the circuit with their yellow flags to guide people left or right. Their flags are absolutely at a standstill. So a little bit of blustery weather, maybe just around the end of the grandstands there over the start-finish straight. But so the encouraging sight is the fact that we have a whole gaggle of cars waiting to get into position. Krone Racing hidden among the runners, car number 78, which is a Porsche. Tracy Krone, and of course, if you have Tracy, you have Nicholas Jonsson. They've driven together for, what is it now? Is this the 15th season?
Oh, yes,
something
like
of that
yes.
ilk. And they're racing in the SP7 class. So again, yet more driving as a pair. I mean, Tracy just can't shake off this racing bug, can he? He just simply loves it. And for Nicholas Jonsson, very affable Swedish driver, he's been such a good partner for Tracy in all their racing exploits. Start delayed, the message had just flashed up. So there we were, feeling slightly smug earlier, thinking, for VLN 1, they had the fog. We're fine, we've got sunshine. We don't have the sunshine anymore.
What is not vouchsafed to us at the moment is how long the start is going to be delayed for. We've got a shot earlier on the screen of the VW Golf, the GT Tyre Motorsport VW Golf, which is one of the great things about VLN is that there is a tyre war. As far as I know, the GT Tyre car does now have GT tyres on it. Need somebody down there local on the grid to confirm that, but there was a time when GT was purely a sponsor of that car. They didn't provide the tyres, but I think now they are providing tyres. So in addition to the many teams who are using Michelin, quite a few that are running in Dunlops, we've also got Falcon tyres, obviously Yokohama's, and plenty more other manufacturers out there, all testing the limits of the performance of their tyres. We're advised now that race control is in the process of checking the track to ensure that none of the snow that has fallen has settled. I'm an optimistic sort of chap, but I don't think it will.
I don't think so. I mean, the fact I said that I spotted the snow going upwards, it shows it's swirling as much as anything else. But on the start-finish straight, it's in the sky. It's not on the track. We haven't seen shots from the far side of the circuit as yet. Wouldn't expect to at this point before the cars go out. But, of course, it's quite a distance from A to B.
Okay. The indication is that I'm now being given is that the start will go on time at 12 o'clock. That slightly contradicts the message we had on the screen saying that it would be delayed. So I certainly at the moment, Bruce, I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to get the race underway on time. Hints that the sun is breaking through, and even though it is bitterly cold, as I said earlier on, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius is the temperature, but it's certainly when the sun does come out, it doesn't suggest at all that there's going to be any snow settling. I think the message came up on the screen to say the start delayed was purely to advise us that race control were going out and checking what was going on. So every indication. The only problem is, because the Nordschleife is so long, if they're going to get the race underway at 12 o'clock local time, they do really need to start the formation lap at about 22. So it's bizarre to think of a 20-minute formation lap, but they do really need to get that underway at 22, which is in 5 minutes' time.
Well, they've got to get the inspection vehicle out of a snowdrift at Exeter, apparently.
Yeah, so once they've got that, but the sun's not shining now, you see, and as soon as the sun shines, then
all is fine again. I think that's official.
Quite. A little bit of jiggery and pokery going on for car number 501, which wanted to join a grid that it didn't belong to. That's the Opel Astra of Tobias Jung, Christian Ryszinski, and Francois Wallace. And of course, because it is a three-part grid. Again, if you've not watched a VLN race before, the grid starts. There are 3 separate grid starts with the cars in different classes starting in different grid formations. They start, some of them, on what you would regard as the normal Formula One grid. The second group then start back or form up back on the little cut-through route that joins the Nordschleife onto the Grand Prix loop, and then the third group starts a little bit behind that. They set them off then behind 3 separate safety cars and start eventually some 2.5 minutes between each starting group. So, as I say, with so many cars on the grid, you can't really afford to get 190 cars all starting together, so they split them into 3 groups of 60-ish, and then we can get the race underway. But as I mentioned, it could well be that we do have a slight delay purely as a result of having to clear the grid, and there's still a large number of people on the grid. But with the prospect of the formation lap starting within the next 5 or 10 minutes, I would suggest the pole position Lant Motorsport entered Audi. Invisible as we were looking down at the grid there, but the Falcon Tires Miami blue coloured BMW alongside it, presumably in the hands of Jens Klingman, as he was the guy who set the starting time at the wheel. So the start delay board is still being shown, and one doesn't yet. We also haven't yet heard whether that means that there is going to be a reduction in the race distance, or whether they're going to be still running to the full 4 hours.
Yeah, I mean, we feel we're getting this on the hoof. I think we can generally be fairly optimistic that we will get away close to time, which obviously is the sort of news we want to hear, having extolled the virtues of having the full 4-hour race to really get stuck into their tactics, because build towards the Nürburgring 24 hours. And the best news is the fact that suddenly the sun has reached the grid. So a bit of spring in our heels as we look into what lies ahead. Theoretically, just over 20 minutes until this race should be underway. So with your reckoning, Paul, that means they should be heading out onto a formation lap fairly soon. That said, there appear to be about 1,000 people on the grid who need to get off it before the cars can set off. I may just be being rather old-fashioned.
Yes, no, I mean, certainly the clearing of the grid hasn't yet got underway properly. I think there are some spectators that are being encouraged to leave. Of course, as always, there are certain team members that need to be there, and they need to be sorted from the rest, as it were. And with such a large grid of cars, and the very open nature of the paddock at the VLN means that there is a huge number of people that come down. I think it's €15 is the admission price to get into the paddock, and that enables you to participate in this grid walk. It enables you to get into the paddock, and it also enables you to get into this main start-finish grandstand overlooking the pit. So very good value for money. The rest of the Nordschleife for itself is pretty much free to get to.
But I think one of the beauties, Paul, is the fact you can wander onto the grid with a coffee and a verse, and you've got 193 cars to look at. So much variety in every sort of car. We just mentioned the number 501 Opel Astra just coming into its own class at the back, but it sort of ranges from that right the way up to, the cutting edge SP9 stroke GT3 runners at the front. All the top teams come out and play. The growth of the cars at the front end has been the real story of the VLN the last 2 or 3 years, I'd suggest. A handful of years ago, there'd been 3 or 4 top teams and then the rest coming out to play to the best of their abilities. But now, I mentioned earlier, KCMG, based in Hong Kong, entering 2 cars in this, and the sheer diversity of machinery as well. But that's also the growth of SP9 stroke GT3.
And it's a funny thing. Somebody was putting forward to me a theory a little while ago that a lot of it is due, and you may laugh at this, but a lot of it is due to virtual racing. A lot of it is due to the fact that suddenly people were getting Nordschleifers appearing on their computer, and they didn't realize that it existed. They knew about this old racetrack that wound through the hills, but they thought, it closed back in 1976 when the Grand Prix stopped going there, and that now all there was the new Grand Prix loop. They didn't realize that this circuit still existed.
I thought it was too good to be true.
And as I say, it then appeared on all these racing games, and then people started to be aware of the thing called the VLN, the series of 9 races, which takes you takes you through the championship season. But also then what the VLN did was to align themselves with the Nürburgring 24-hour race, and so that in order to get your license to run at the Nürburgring 24-hour race, you had to compete in a certain number of VLN races, and then also by doing well in the VLN races, you also get into the Superpole top 40 shootout for grid positions for the Nürburgring 24 hours. And all of that just adds to the popularity and the knowledge and the general awareness of the whole VLN series. And, the evidence is out before our eyes at the moment, the huge success of the series.
And here we are with it being streamed all around the world. Running an RS3 today. Very busy weekend for Radio Show Limited. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's go, go, go all around the globe. But hopefully for us on RS3, we will be go, go, go here at the Nürburgring very soon indeed. The start was due to be about 16, 17 minutes from now. May not be the case. It may be slightly delayed. And if you're just dialing in, just starting to listen to the broadcast, we're not going to get away bang on time. There's been a flurry of, we thought at first rain, a few cars going for rotations, but then it turned out to be light snow over the Nürburgring, not settling on the start-finish straight, and now people are being encouraged to leave the grid, and that in itself, Paul, is an encouraging sight, not just because we get to see...
Alles begann mit 2 Freunden und einer Vision. Unsere Initialen stehen für Qualität und Fortschritt. Wir schaffen den Technologietransfer von der Rennstrecke auf die Straße. Wir fertigen Gewindefahrwerke, Sportfedersätze, Stabilisatoren, Distanzscheiben und Gewindefedern zu 100% in Deutschland. Wir arbeiten mit Herzblut und Hingabe für diesen einen Moment. Wir sind Motorsport. Wir sind H&R.
as the mainstays at the front of the grid.
So it seems I have to keep giving you weather checks now, just as they're about to get going. What's arrived on the start-finish straight? Snow and a bit of wind. Wind coming from the northeast.
More of it as well, I think.
Much more of it. This is as heavy as we've seen at any point. We don't know, because we haven't got cameras at the far end of the circuit, how hard it was snowing there to start with. We were feeling quite confident. People still being cleared from the grid, but the drivers largely will be closing the doors unless they're worried about their windows steaming up, because they want to keep what vestige of heat they have in the cockpit inside. But now we've got, yes, up on the Grand Prix loop, we have the snow coming in and with wind as well. So suddenly things going backwards rather than forward. But we've had no further message saying they're not going to set off on the formation lap. In fact, passenger getting on board the Porsche sitting in front of the grid. Just waiting for the driver to get on board as well. So it looks like they're going to head out and see what's out there. But I don't want to second guess that. We'll have to wait and discover exactly what is happening. So this one's swung back and forth several times, Paul, ahead of the start.
And as you say, it's not unknown for this kind of weather. You're fairly high up. You're about 2,000 feet up in the mountains here. So whilst you may just have a rain shower down a little bit lower down in the valleys, it does turn to snow further up. But as we keep repeating, the problem is not necessarily the snow in the air. It's whether it settles on not just the track, but also on the runoff areas alongside, because that's where all of a sudden it does start to become a danger when you have runoff areas, and there are few and far between anyway at the Nordschleife. But if they've put a runoff area there and it's got either snow or ice on it, then it ceases to have any purpose at all as a runoff area. So they'll, I think that's going to be the main danger.
Yeah, and for all the drivers of any experience of racing in cold, wet weather, they need to stay off those curbs, because while the track might be dried, if it stops snowing, that any moisture sits in those curbs, and hopefully they're not often used. But when you do, you suddenly find you just don't have the grip that you would have had on the track, and we will have gyrations. We've already had several cars spinning on their outlap just to go around the Grand Prix loop to come to the grid. So really, that was in the three-mile section early on. Plenty of space, plenty of runoff there, but we had a few cars going around. The number 91 Porsche had a smack on the side and was leaking fluid. That was shared by Axel Friedhoff and Max Friedhoff. And whether they can affect any repairs on that, they may just decide, actually, we've looked at the repair, we could do it, but if the snow's setting in for the day, perhaps we'll wait for VLN 3. Let's not second guess, but they did limp back to the pits.
I mean, as I was mentioning a moment ago, I mean, if the conditions are mixed, then it certainly is going to be a challenge. I mean, looking at what we can see of the circuit, it's not a damp circuit, but whether you want to be on full slick tyres or not, I'm not really sure. You might well want to be on a slightly intermediate tyre if you have one available to you. On the other hand, a particularly soft race tyre might actually be the best thing to get heat into the tyres. And if there is no standing water out there because the snow is merely being blown away from the circuit, it might not be affecting the race surface very much at all. But still waiting for clarification as to what is going to happen. Cars are pretty much ready to go now, but of course they will be on slick tyres, for that is what they were set to be on. So we're going to have to wait and see, Bruce.
Yep, listed as 12:15 local time race start. The camera's on. Oh my gosh! Just as they were about to looked all set to leave the grid, looking down the run back to the pits is suddenly the long shot is more white than scenery. So the snow is really falling on the run towards the Bremskurve at the end of the long straight. The run from Nürburgring village effectively back to the modern complex, and it is now just arriving. That same flurry has arrived at the back end of this 190-car grid. But still, people looking to the front of the grid to see if there's any further signal. Further back in the second batch of cars, Paul, I noticed still quite a lot of people hanging around. So they haven't been hurried off the grid. So there's a lot of waiting, a lot of listening, trying to work out when exactly this is going to be underway. Still listed as a 12:15 start, but I have a sneaking feeling that is going to keep changing. That said, the backside of the Grand Prix circuit, the low area behind the paddock, the kink, hardly snowing there at all. So it's just arriving on the wind. The higher ground, maybe the lower parts of the circuit, might be okay. But again, whenever shown a long shot, the sky cannot be seen because the sky is white. The sky is just hanging there.
But this is the issue, isn't it? Because it's already well delaying the start, but you get the race underway, and then there's going to be another flurry. There's going to be another belt of this very light snow. I mean, it does look spectacular because of the way that the cameras are set up, but it's, as I said before, it's not sufficient, to my mind, to actually wet the circuit. I mean, we can see the track, and it looks bone dry to me. It will be very slippery, but it's not wet.
Driver's just been shown aboard again, and I just want to reiterate, I said the sky was white, but what I mean by that is the fact that it was a very long shot. So if you're shooting from the side across the circuit, but not taking a long shot, just a regular shot, it's not snowing as much, but it's definitely snowing. It's not big flakes. It was only one step up from rain. We saw it metamorphose from rain to snow. Yellow flag being hung out of the Porsche safety car window. Still a few drivers with their doors open on the grid, including the Schnitzer BMW that's sitting second. And the weather is changing by the minute. Where we didn't have visibility a minute ago, we now do down the long run back towards the pit. So fingers crossed, but it's changing backwards and forwards. So VLN 1 2019 delayed by fog. Start delayed. We were feeling pretty pleased with ourselves earlier, thinking, well, we've got lovely spring sunshine, people milling around on the grid, and now the people in the grandstands are retreating to higher ground to get under the awning, whereas before they were sitting there with pretzel and coffee, ready for what lies ahead. But right now, it's a very different scene.
But the very fact that the weather worsened so rapidly means, to my mind, that it can also improve again very rapidly. And as I say, I think the issue I have, just looking at my little weather app, is that the forecast is much the same for the rest of the day, with no real rise in temperature over the whole of the rest of the day. And that means that any little showers like this are going to be falling as snow flurries and sleet flurries. Indication there that there is now a little bit of dampness beginning to form on the circuit. They're going to have to start the formation lap within the next 2 minutes, by my reckoning, if they're going to get the race underway by 12:15. That was the last message, and no further message has been received since then that 12:15 is not going to be the restart of the race, or sorry, the renewed notification of the start of the race. It's not a restart, but the start of the race. But
yes, and I think what we're getting now, Paul, it's as we just were looking at some long shots. Oh, hold on, we have no message. I thought there was a message coming on the screen to reveal all. It was just giving us the full name and the fact it was the 44th DMV 4-hour race. But I think we're edging away from snow back to rain. That's why we were just looking at a circuit that looked a little bit of a different colour to before. So I think we're just on that cusp between the two. And if it could just, for most drivers, it's a tricky enough circuit to start with. And we're saying, if it could just change from snow to rain, that we'll all be fine. They're thinking, we've got a very busy job out there. But look at the pros at the front end of the grid. And I mean, they are absolutely just at the top of their game. Almost all of them know this circuit very well indeed. One of the KCMG Nissans has got Krista Johns joining this weekend, but the others, Philip Vlasic, Christian Menzel, know these cars, know this circuit very well.
Yeah, Philip Vlasic down to drive both of them. So whether he will actually drive both or only switch if he has a problem on his first car, we'll have to wait and see. But certainly the Nissan Nismo GT3 are certainly a potent combination on the Nürburgring. But your point of a moment ago, absolutely right, Bruce. I mean, these guys are Nürburgring specialists. There's going to be people further back who are trying to get their Nordschleife permit, who are far less experienced in the conditions. And as and when the race does get underway, they will need to be careful when they're being lapped to stay out of the way of the rest of the traffic. But the guys at the front, they know their way around the track, they know where it goes, but B, they know where the danger points are. They know where it's likely to be a little bit more slippery when the temperature isn't there, where the water is likely to gather, if indeed it does gather. And also they know the bits that dry out more quickly, and so can go more quickly in those areas. So there's a lot of experience up at the front, and some other people further back who will be learning their way around to a large extent.
Good news, people watching, there are fewer people on the grid. They've suddenly scurried off. Either someone's rung very loudly on the coffee gong, and a pretzel.
I was about to
3
say
minutes to go. There's the board. I was looking for that.
Yes, I was about to say 2 boards have been shown in about 2 minutes of each other, and my guess was going to be it was either a 3-minute board and a 1-minute board, or a 5-minute board and a 3-minute board, but it was 5 and 3. So we've now got a 3-minute board. This is for the start of the formation lap, and in fact the formation lap is now underway. So before the scheduled start time of 12 o'clock, we are getting the formation lap underway for VLN2.
Kicking off at 11:57. I just noticed the clock as they beat through, but as the cars move away, you know what? They're kicking up a tiny little bit of spray. Fantastic low camera angle. And what we saw early on was this rain turning to snow around the Grand Prix loop. Couldn't see it out on the full Nordschleife, so we'll keep an eye as the cars go down to the first corner, that double apex right-hander. Of course, they're being led around slowly. They're being very, very ginger in their driving style, just keeping lightly on their toes.
Around the full Mercedes arena, which is the full part of the Grand Prix loop, which is not the same part of the circuit as they would use for the 24 hours, but it is the traditional VLN circuit, the full Mercedes arena, but then they cut through halfway down.
They go right where they'd normally go left, effectively, don't they? They're starting to drop down the slope, nowhere near the hairpin at the bottom of the hill, but they come out of the Mercedes arena, short, stabby little straight, and then off to the right, and then down the dip, through the kink, and then up the hill, and then they know what comes next, the Nordschleife.
Yes. And the Lant Motorsport then leading the way ahead of the Falcon Motorsports BMW in second place. A problem for one of the KTM crossbows. 3 cars running in the KTM crossbow class, this being the Georg Griesemann Teichmann Racing crossbow.
He's going to have to kick himself. He's the only driver listed for that car at the moment, and knows this circuit very well. But then again, that's what this formation lap is for. Not for spinning, but just for checking the situation. I must say, again and again, when they show the kink behind the paddock before they rise up and go through the chicane, it tends to be dry.
Norwegian driver Runar Wagner joining Georg Griesemann in the number 930 Cup X car. Whether it was Griesemann or Wagner, not sure, but
I don't feel they'll be alone, so they fall to the back of their particular pack of cars. That should be the lead pack of the 3. Now, cars that stand out in the weather, that HTP Motorsport, the bright yellow and sort of acid yellow and green markings on that, sort of one of the easier cars to pick out in the Merc. Just to reiterate, that's driven by Maxi Götz, Christian Hohenadel and Lance David Arnold. HTP Motorsport been doing great things, obviously, with Mercedes for years. The second grouping of cars now being led away from the grid. And I dare say the weather they're experiencing as they go to turn 1 into the Mercedes arena is already different from the weather being experienced 2 minutes, 3 minutes before by the lead grouping. So if you're just
not worse, though, I would say it's certainly not worse now than it was when the GT3 cars went through.
No, I'm with you on that. And if you just were cutting it fine and joining us on RS3 to grab the start, the 4 hours of VLN2 hasn't quite started yet. We've had a little flurry of snow arrive, and we're probably going to be about 15 minutes late to the start of the race. There seemed to be a bit of umming and ahhing on the grid. They were looking for reports from around the circuit to check on weather and, most importantly, track conditions, and they'd be given the nod to get underway. 190 cars or so coming out to play, starting to brighten up all over again, but the weather is swinging as it does so often in the Eifel Mountains, one way and then the other. But I'm sure, come what may, we're going to have some cracking racing when we get underway.
183 on the official grid, having had 193 on the provisional entry list. One car didn't start qualifying, but everyone else down to take part in the race, starting in 3 separate groups, and the second group already underway with their formation lap. full lap of the Nordschleife behind a pace car takes around about 15 minutes. At full racing speed, the fastest lap of the practice session, of the qualifying session, just a whisker, 0.07 of a second over 8 minutes. Quite a large margin, 1.3 seconds was the gap between René Rast and the best of the rest, which was Jens Klingmann in the Falcon Motorsports BMW. That was the second fastest car. Third fastest, the Audi of Pierre Caffer. Kelvin van der Linde was, sorry, it's not Kelvin, it's Sheldon van der Linde. At the wheel of the BMW, number 42 on the outside of the second row of the grid, and the third row of the grid, Frank Stippler with the Phoenix Racing Audi, joined by Jamie Green. I see, actually, there was a fairly late addition to the entry. Jamie Green due to drive the number 5 Phoenix Racing Audi, and then the outside of the third row of the grid, the yellow man filter HTP Motorsport entered Mercedes. Fastest of the Mercedes, the HTP car, number 48, with Maxi Ghost, Christian Hernadel and Lance David Arnold, the driving lineup.
Third batch of cars get underway, and there is a thing called the SUN starting to break through. So we're getting through a lot of seasons in one day, but all seems to be improving, which is great news. So it looks like we're going to be starting the race maybe about 20 past, judging by the time these cars might get back around the track. Hopefully 12:15, but whereas as recently as 10 minutes ago, when the snow was suddenly really flurrying on the start-finish straight, luckily not settling though, we thought we might have start properly delayed as opposed to just in a small way, but I don't think we're out of the woods as yet. In fact, these cars aren't even into the woods. They're about to turn left into the woods, but final batch of cars, including that inimitable Opel Manta that's been racing here for so long, tucked in among the Cup 5 BMWs, and then the tail end cars of the smaller groupings at the back end of the field sitting in. But just they're all getting their sighting laps and just seeing how it is. But as fast as I say sunshine, I can also say snow flurry, because those are still dropping at various points around the circuit. So the drivers are going to have to be absolutely on their tiptoe. Through the Grand Prix loop, though, it looks as though it's all drying out. But let's throw this into the mix. Paul keeps mentioning it, and quite rightly so. Tyre temperatures, track temperatures, all low. Well, are not likely to rise enormously, because though I mentioned the sun, it's a hazy sky at the moment, and cloud I think I spotted over the Grand Prix, over the Nordschleife. So we'll have to wait and see. But the weather has been arriving from the northeast. Just bear that in mind. Yeah, I mean the sun on the circuit will at least help the track temperature a little bit, but it will, as you say, Bruce, it will be a bit of a challenge to get the tyres working for you. And of course, you can't afford to weave too much in conditions like this, because otherwise you're going to end up, as a couple have already, having spins on the formation lap. I mean, never mind about 4 seasons in one day. It's 4 seasons in a single formation lap, as the final group of cars in the very highly populated classes. The V4 class, we said earlier on, not 27 cars on the entry for them. 22 cars entered in the Cup 5 class. The Cup 5 class being for the new BMW M240i Racing Cup. This is a new class for this year. It was the M235i last year, you'll remember, but the 240i, which is the new spec of BMW, it's still a 3.5 litre car, but BMW just chooses to call it BMW M240i. I think the only difference is a slightly bigger end plate on the rear wing, and there's something at the front that's slightly different, but it still runs a 3.5 litre car, even though it's called an M240i. I got very excited when they announced the 240i. I thought, more power, the sort of thing that Jeremy Clarkson likes to shout about. But always been a fan of more power, but that wasn't indeed the case. But yeah, but it's been such a success since they launched that, and our only concern is the fact that the vast majority of the cars all were painted in the blue and orange of one particular team, and wherever you look, they seem to be not helpful. There'll be 3 of them in a 5-car pack, so from a totally selfish point of view. Just let's give you a clue as some of the camera cars going around the circuit at the moment. It's car number 2, which is going to be carrying one of the cameras. It's the Get Speed Performance Mercedes, shared by Philip Ellis, Fabian Vettel, Jan Seifert, and Christopher Brook. car 57, which is an SP7 Porsche from the Black Falcon team. That will be carrying another one of our cameras. We like to have them liberally sprinkled around the field. And in fact, as we look through its windscreen, it appears to be grey but dry out of the back part of the circuit. They're going around Exmüller towards Bergwerk, and in fact, not quite that far around. But waved white flags from the marshals, of course, slow-moving vehicle. That's what they'd expect on at the front of the field as they're going around. Very, very important sighting lap. I mean, in regular dry conditions, Paul, a sighting lap, just to remind them, there are quite a few corners on the lap, but this time it's where is it damp? But actually, it's all looking pretty fine, I'd say.
I think the problem is, for them as much as anything else, yes, they can say, oh, yeah, it's fine this time around, but by the time they get there in about 10, 12 minutes' time, when they're going to be racing, it could well have changed, and that is what makes life so difficult. And what really shows the class of a good Nordschleife specialist. The 917 is the next of the camera cars to make a note of. 917 being the Cup 3 class Porsche 718 Cayman from Schmickler Performance. Ivan Yakima, Claudius Karch and Kai Riemer, the drivers of that one, just coming out from the Breitscheid Bridge and up the hill towards Hohe Acht, the highest part of the circuit, and then beginning the long descent down through the sequence of Wipperman curves and down to the big spectator enclosure down at Brunchen. Switching to the 960 camera car, the car of the MSC Adenauer, Teichmann Racing from, again, another Cayman GT4 trophy car, Daniel Bohr, Max and Jens, two of our familiar pseudonymous drivers that we get used to at the VLN. Daniel Bohr sharing then with Max and Jens in the Teichmann Racing Cup 3 class car.
They've been our chauffeurs for quite a lot of rounds over there, haven't they, Max and Jens? And always seem to be right in the heart of the battle, so that they get what they come to the circuit for, which is great racing on an absolutely brilliant circuit. But from my point of view, what I keep looking for is any changes in the weather. Going around out of the carousel with 152, Team Knuffley. Again, that's one of our camera cars. That's out of the Black Falcon stable. Black Falcon based just across from the circuit.
An SP8 class, sorry, an SP8T class car, a turbocharged Mercedes GT4, and I suspect that is a proper GT4 class car, but with something different, because Black Falcon and GT4 doesn't quite mix with the SP8T class otherwise. Norbert Schneider, Mehmet Mustafa Kaya and Christoph Hoffmann, the drivers of the Knuffy Black Falcon Mercedes GT4 class car. Maybe that one's running the quad turbo car from 2020.
Quad turbo ground effect, it's got the lot. You were talking, just as we go around, you were going around the Nordschleife last weekend, and comment you really struck a chord with me when you said that when you used to go and do it, you went around, everyone turned up in cars a bit like whatever you were driving. It's serious business now. When you see people trailering their cars to the circuit, but these aren't just any cars. These are cars that are made to really, really perform. So it's not just idle tourists like you or I.
No,
you still can.
Absolutely, and I think that was part of the pleasure of it, was whilst I wasn't necessarily concentrating on racing lines, but I was sharing a track with full house Audi R8s, with GT3 Porsches, we got overtaken by a 488 Ferrari. I mean, I overtook a Golf.
Did you? You've let yourself down, Paul.
I overtook a Golf. But that was the only overtaking move that I managed. But no, but what also I was reminded of is the severity of some of the curbs. Some of the curbs you get on the Nordschleife itself, particularly after Brunchen, coming out of the ice curve into Flansgarten. That's where the curbs are very substantial indeed, and they're half a wheel arch high. You know, you don't want to be getting onto those at all, because they'll completely knock the car off its racing line.
And it's something that obviously when drivers of the front end cars are coming through and lapping, they've really, really got to pay attention, because as you say, what a great description, half a wheel arch, thump, there goes your suspension, tips the balance of the car, and you're going to be shoveled across to the other side of the track. And on the Nordschleife, that's not very far, but it's enough to cause you all sorts of bother. One thing I want to pick out, Paul, just as while it's quiet before we get going, is you have to go through the entry with a fine-tooth comb every time to find names if you might have just overlooked them. But I noticed Mehdi Banani, who races in the World Touring Car Championship, he's having a go. He's racing in the Cup 5 class, and there are so many little cameo roles. And in fact, it did rather make me laugh looking at one of the camera cars with the graphic. It was number 23, the Rooster Rojo J2 Racing Mercedes, and it was John Schaffner with an American flag, Fabian Schiller with a German flag, and we've got a car facing backwards. We'll come to that in a second. And then it's Janine Hill, who's also American, but they've got a Union flag. So obviously Jake Hill, the British touring car racers, crossed over for that. So did you spot the car that was facing, how should we say, counter fashion?
Yes, in the
yellow and black.
In the wrong direction. I didn't. I think it was a GT4 Audi R8, but not entirely sure about that. We'll just have a look at the SP10 are GT4s, and we haven't actually got any GT4 Audi R8s I see in the entry list, so maybe it was a GT3 class car that had made the spin. But as they come down to Dottinger, Bruce, it's the end of the full formation lap for the first starting group. Glorious sunshine. Still bitterly cold out there. Lots of weaving from side to side to get heat into the tyres. The only car keeping it straight is the pace car up at the front. In the pits, oh dear, is the Conrad Lamborghini. How many times have we seen the Conrad Lamborghini in the pits?
Not normally until quite late in the race. Every three-quarter distance and off they pull. 7th
quickest it was in qualifying, but it's not going to be starting from its position on the 4th row of the grid. There's going to be a gap there. It's going to be the Lant Audi against the Falcon BMW, and then the red car collection Audi, the number 32 car, with the Schnitzer BMW just behind it. Kelvin van der Linde, car number 42, or Sheldon, I've done that before. Yeah. Sheldon van der Linde, the driver who qualified it, as they come into this final section after the Antonio Spucher and into Tiergarten. What I had forgotten is quite the extent of the hill you have to come up at the end of that little portion. 2
GT3 or SP9 class cars, we call them here, in the pits. Phoenix Racing, the one we mentioned, Jamie Green, should have been on board. That should have been starting 5th. That is also going to be taking the start from the pit lane. So a fair bit of shuffling, but what we can tell you is the Monteplast Audi is on the inside of the front row, and the turquoise nose of the Falcon Motorsport BMW alongside.
I wonder if those cars are in the pits on a different tyre, more suitable to conditions. But for my money, Bruce, this is slick tyres conditions.
It certainly is. So interesting. The cars at number 5 should have been starting 5th, and number 7, rather kindly, should have been starting 7th, starting from the pit lane. But it's Monteplast Audi from Falcon Motorsport BMW, Car Collection Audi, Schnitzer BMW. They're the first 4. Brilliant getaway from the Monteplast Audi. Puts its nose in front, the whole car length in front. The BMW tucks in behind. One of the KCMG Nissans dives to the pit lane as well, also looking for a change of rubber, but the hammer was well and truly down in the Monteplast pole-sitting Audi, and the Car Collection Audi trying to go up the inside into turn 1. It's not going to happen. BMW takes the lead into the first corner, but hasn't got a whole load of braking done, but in fact sweeps around the outside through the right-hander, and the Falcon Motorsport BMW, obviously very, very brave on what is clearly still a slightly slippery track, takes the lead.
The Falcon tyres working extremely well then for, is that Jens Klingman, or is it Peter Dumbrecht? Klingman was the guy who set the qualifying time, but great start from him. A little bit of contact there, was there, in the lower half of the top 10?
Looks as though the black Falcon Mercedes, the red liveried car, that looks like it got its nose right under the tail of the car in front. Raindrops on the camera lens, sunshine in the sky. Falcon Motorsport BMW pulling well clear. The Car Collection Audi went up into 2nd place. So despite that brilliant getaway, getting the hammer right down, the Land Motorsport Audi back into 3rd position. And looks like Tom Coronel, that's not Tom Coronel, one of the KCMG drivers, brought the car to the pits. They are changing the tyres, but the driver seems to have got out and walked away.
Doesn't seem terribly
That's
happy.
the number 39 KCMG car. That was, I think it was Christian Menzel, I think, walking away.
But great start by Jens Klingman, or at least the Falcon tired BMW, and he's opened up almost a second of an advantage, I would suggest, as he heads out onto the Nordschleife as the Group 2 class cars come into they're starting under their starting orders.
And we've got a Lamborghini off the side of the circuit. It's the Dieter Schmidtmann Heiko Hammel Pro-Am Class SP9 car on the grass. Can't see if there's any damage, but it's not going anywhere. But cars that will be going somewhere are this second group. About 70 of them coming up to the final corner. The Nissan safety car will pull to the side of the circuit. There's a Hyundai TCR car at the front of that bunch. And the best of the TCR cars in qualifying is that car number 830. And the hammer is down for them. And again, the pole starter in class takes the lead on as they go past pit entry. But will he still be in front? Because we saw the Land Motorsport Audi doing that and not managing to be first into the first corner. It was second into the first corner and third out of the tail. So that's the Harold Prochik, Peter Turting Hyundai, which again, in the same fashion, brilliant start, gets overtaken, down to second by the first corner, might also repeat the first group and be third by corner 2. But right now it's a Porsche in front and that Hyundai, the TCR car, not as brilliant in the straight line, but we know they're absolutely mighty through the twisty bits.
Yeah, I think the Hyundai actually lost out there on the second part of the Mercedes arena and has now slipped down to third, fourth, fifth place, a lot further down. Has that car, which I skipped. What I missed as I watched the Hyundai slipping down was who moved up into second place. It's the blue and white Porsche.
I just want to build on that. Slip back, slip back. I don't think it's even in the top 10, the Hyundai, just waiting for it to go. But it is literally 10th position. Someone's had a spin, well, it seems, in the background, but the leader in the class doing a very good job. Flurries of snow, sunshine, the second of the 3 groups at the start of VLN. We had a start delayed by about 15 minutes, and that just seemed to whet the appetite of the Falco Motorsport BMW crew, mighty into turn 1 and pulling clear.
However, the good news is that the countdown clock is showing us as if it's going to be a full 4-hour race, so we're not constrained by any curfew. As I said earlier on, 4 o'clock can come and go. This will be a full 4-hour VLN race as scheduled. Just getting underway, as Bruce says, 15 minutes or so late than its originally scheduled start time, with some snow flurries around the Nordschleife. And the prospect of those flurries to continue for the next 3 or 4 hours. We'll see what happens. It'll keep people very honest indeed as we wait for the third group to make their way up onto the end of the Dottingerhohe and up to the start.
Cold conditions, obviously, with snow in the air, but doesn't seem to be on the track. Certainly the part of the tracks we've seen, there has been contact out on the circuit, though not everybody got it right on the formation lap. And we can see a couple of tattered and battered cars. Number 616 in the pit lane. It's been given a whack up the derriere. And 616, I have to shuffle right along way up my enormous entry list. It's Thomas Overbeck, Michael Lindemeyer, the little Renault Clio RS Cup, marginally shorter than when they bought it to the track this morning. But as we ride out around the circuit, always looking for the onboard camera shots as Group 3 is about to drop the hammer and go racing. Generally, the track looks dry, but it's very, very cold indeed. So caution required when they get underway down to turn 1. We've seen some very, very brave late braking and certainly positional changes. But the best of all was Falco Motorsport pulling clear, pulling past the pole starting Audi. So Peter Dumbreck, Jens Klingmann, BMW into the front, into the lead of the race, and pulling away. And now the multiple 2, 3, 4 abreast BMWs. When has it ever been anything different in VLN in the last few years? Down into turn 1. Dare say there's been a little bit of contact. The car that started about 5th in class has been given a bit of a shove wide, but I must say, of the 3 groups, I think they've all really been very, very sensible down at the entry to the Mercedes arena.
What wasn't quite clear was the cause of that huge cloud of smoke that we saw when Group 2 did their start, because we could see, looking back, a huge cloud of smoke, which might just have been the ending of tyre smoke. But there was a lot of smoke at the beginning of the start number 2, but the BMW M240i's then having a good clean start. As you say, they were trying to get 5 of them into that first corner absolutely together, weren't they, Bruce? But it didn't quite happen. But it looks like it's the FK Performance Motorsport car number 679, which is leading the way in that class at the moment. Christian Conner, Juha Hananen and Mark Eret, the 3 drivers of that BMW.
When you just talked about the smoke that we saw as the second group went through, when I started that sentence, I thought someone's had a spin. Then as I carried on, I thought someone's got a barbecue going. And in fact, it's down beyond. It's very much the lower end of the Grand Prix loop in the woods. It looks like someone's just got a big bonfire, a big blaze going. It's just too far from the track, but always looking for signs. And on the opening lap, of course, with this many cars, you do expect a little bit of action that could have cars facing possibly in the wrong direction. But in the back half of the circuit, as we arrive around with car number 57, which is the Black Falcon Porsche from SP7, it's snowing, it's wet, there's spray coming up from going past the Krone Racing Porsche. Suddenly, just as we were confident it was drying at the top end of the circuit, out of the far end of the Nordschleife, it's not looking nice at all. And every car we flick to, the windscreen wipers are on and off. And
these are all the GT4 class
exactly.
cars,
So the front ones have already gone through. Now we're riding with the front grouping. Conrad Motorsport Lamborghini in front of us. That was starting from the pit, so that's picking its way up the order past some GT4 runners. Yeah, okay, so some have really, really backed off. You can't blame the visibility becoming much, much shorter. And the GT3 Lamborghini is picking its way past the GT3 SP9. I have to remember which event we're covering. So people being cautious, and I think with very, very good reason.
Coming up the hill towards Carousel, and it is, as Bruce is saying, very tricky conditions indeed. But on the other hand, if you can stay out of trouble here, then you're going to survive to fight another day. So you don't want to push on too hard. You don't want to take too many risks. Out of the Kleiner Carousel and onto the Dottinger Höhe for the first time. And I reckon that's Sheldon van der Linde, the 42 Schnitzer BMW, Bruce, that's leading the way. BMW's 1 and 2, with the Falcon-tired BMW in second place. And then in third place, it's Pierre Caffer's car collection, Audi, I reckon. And no sign at all of the Lamp Motorsport car.
Looking and waiting, but clearly a very, very good lap from the Schnitzer BMW. We thought that Falcon Motorsport car, after that brilliant start, was going to escape. But then again, we haven't seen exactly what conditions. And change of tyres for some of the crews. They're getting going to get the slicks off and put them on treaded tyres. I wonder if anybody has started on tread.
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult decision to make, isn't it? Do you come in?
Early.
Do you stay out? Because only the driver really knows what the conditions are like for the full extent of the circuit.
And worth pointing out, of course, at that point, though they were bringing some other tyres towards the front with some tread on them, the pits are in actual near sunshine. It's the far end of the circuit, so communication has to be very strong. The Land Motorsport Audi, weaving as it does so, goes over the start-finish line, so it's fallen from pole. Now it's running just in front of the car that qualified 11th, the Team Zaxspeed Dodge. So things are changing. Now it looks so as snow is falling on at the exit of the Mercedes arena that the Schnitzer Motorsport BMW is being pushed very, very hard indeed by the Black Falcon Motorsport BMW that led on the opening lap. And I sense that car collection Audi is just saying, well, I'm going to sit on your tail and watch what happens. Just looking for any further messages, but it's Martin Tomczyk leading the way now. Brilliant, brilliant first lap for him in the Schnitzer Motorsport BMW, but they have to have a large element of caution, particularly at that far end of the circuit. So it's Tomczyk from Klingman, Stippler, Mies, Blakemolen. So the pole starting Audi led towards the first corner, not into it. Fell back down the order, is running in fourth place, but your own Blakemolen up 6 places in that mighty Dodge Viper. So top handful of cars covered by, we're talking about a dozen seconds for the top 5 or 6. In fact, it's opened this out to 15 seconds for the top 6 now, as it keeps spacing out. Car in 6th place is Lance David Arnold in the number 48 Mercedes. That's the bright yellow one, Team HTP Motorsport. Showing that with Maxi Götz and Christian Hohenadel, but it's Lance David Arnold at the wheel, leading around. We've got some great racing out around in the middle class of cars. But again, a lot of caution. And when the class leaders in SP9, the race leaders, were heading down to the far end of the circuit, the section around Verscheifen, Bergwerk, I think the conditions were okay. But certainly when the second group of cars got around there, things were looking very, very dicey indeed. Top runners in the various classes. Top car in SPX is Thomas Jaeger in car number 52. It's the Mercedes we talked about earlier, Paul, that's in the specials class. It's AMG GT3 with bits, wasn't it? That was what Adam Christodoulou
yes, he told me he wasn't allowed to tell me anything. So
he didn't tell you anything.
No, indeed. But it does have bits on it that are not homologated, which is why it's running as an SPX class car. Just noticing, looking down, Bruce, that the Conrad Lamborghini has got out and is in going through, showing on the screens at least, as being in 19th place. And the Phoenix Racing Audi, which we saw also starting from the pit lane, has come through at the completion of the first lap in 20th place. So 19th and 20th, those two cars that started from the pit lane. And another spin from the KTM Crossbow being shown as Gail Griesemann at the wheel of it.
One more and he gets the full set, the full trio of triple axles in ice skating terminology. And again, yet again, thank you to David on the old Skype service around her act. Driving under yellow flags due to snow on track. We wonder whether it will settle. It has started to do so. One of the Walkham's Horse Motorsport BMWs having running repairs, damage to the right-hand flank. It's actually the bodywork under the door, the valance, if you will. Too badly bent, but enough for details. That's been given a clout, whether by someone else, a spinning car would think, but certainly Hoeracht and beyond. It's a winter wonderland.
I've got a photo here that's been tweeted through by Mario Paulsen showing what I think that's at either Flugplatz or Schwedenkreuz on the outside there. And yes, very miserable looking conditions. Or it could just be coming into Brunchen. I think it's probably Brunchen.
Yeah, that'll get my money from that photo.
Yeah, so...
great photo. Keep sending them in.
Lovely photo there showing how bad the conditions there are.
There are fallers, unfortunately. Matilda Racing, their TCR class Seat Cupra coming in with a very battered front right corner. May make it back, but it's clearly had a clonk against the barriers. It's got about 90% of the way around the lap, but it's limping in at about 10 degrees away from the normal angle. Just got to go up for the final sweep of corners. Can it turn in?
658. Was that 658 you just
No,
saw?
I've forgotten already. It's Matilda Racing, which was number 806.
Okay.
Heiko Hammel, Matthias Vossel and Frederick Yerli. Quite a few cars from the front group having not just a change of tyres, but bodywork straightening. So it's worse than we expected out on this lap. Don't forget, they had the track inspection, then they had their formation lap. Just as they came around, it looked so they got everything right because the sun started to shine on the start-finish straight. But at the far end of the circuit, some 5 miles as a crow flies away from the pit lane, that is where the snow was really starting to fall, and it's working its way to 3/4 away around the lap, around Hoeracht and beyond.
And every possibility that this isn't the final time that we're going to see that snow moving through. Lance David Arnold, did you mention he came into the pits at the end of his opening lap?
Yes, I did.
You did, right. Sorry, I was concentrating on other things at the time. So they're putting wet tyres onto the HTP Mercedes.
So again, weather watch, very, very important. And a red flag has just been flown. Red flag has been flown. So as the leading cars are on their second lap, they've decided the conditions at the far end of the circuit. It's not the fog that afflicted VLN 1, but VLN 2, slightly delayed start. They didn't chance their arm. They thought the weather might be improving. We knew it was going to be in and out, Paul, through the course today. But actually, having looked at those conditions and the photos that have been sent in, I think for now that's a sensible course of action, because even from the first group of cars, quite a few coming in with damage.
And I think the problem is as well, Bruce, that because it's not clearly wet conditions, so a lot of the cars were staying out there on slick tyres, the race organisers perhaps taking the things into their own hands and saying, look, if you're not going to come in and go on to wets, then we're going to have to stop the race, because it clearly isn't safe for you to be out on the Nordschleife on slick tyres, racing slick tyres, when conditions are as bad as they obviously are out there. And not only that, but as we were saying earlier on, Bruce, the track surface now is getting very clearly wet.
Well, clearly, but not even particularly clearly, simply because, the track is very, very wet, but visibility has dropped away to very, very little around the back of the circuit. Not just from spray. Riding on board, we've been riding on board with the team, the 152 Black Falcon Mercedes, switched over to 162, but they all tell the same story. And number 2, unfortunately, is sitting sideways in the track. That's the Get Speed Performance Mercedes that was starting from 3rd on the grid, but no speed at all when you're sitting sideways on the track.
Christopher
Nose
Brook
toward
at the wheel.
Christopher Brook, okay, 4-driver lineup. And in fact, the snow is starting to settle on the grass just in front of the barriers around the back of the track as we go past the stricken Get Speed Performance Mercedes with its tail, its ambulance on the track, working its way around, hopefully for no further purpose, but tail to the barriers and where there should be grass around the far end of the circuit, all cars into the pit, red flag, that is snow now settled on the grass.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was saying earlier on about the runoff area, there isn't very much of it at the Nordschleife, but where it is, there is a bit of runoff area. Then, as Bruce says, just snow now settling on those areas, and so yeah, the organisers didn't really have a lot of option but to stop the race when only one full racing lap had been completed, but not by everybody, because only the leading GT3 class cars had done their full first racing lap. So it may well be that in terms of the race, we get a complete clean restart with no where everybody being allowed to restart from the original starting positions. So good news perhaps for Land Motorsport.
Bad news, though, in so many ways for those that do have to continue around for this second lap, no longer at racing speed, providing they can see the red flag, of course. But at various points, I talked of the snow on the grass inside the track. In fact, I could see some crushed snow where drivers had gone across the circuit, clanged the barriers on the outside before bouncing back to the circuit. So some have clearly been caught out. We saw that number 806, Matilda Cupra, limping in, front right wheel clearly not at the right angle, bodywork bent. So very, very careful for these drivers as they work their way back. So a day that started with fine sunshine and a spring-like day. Even looking from the onboard cameras, it's very, very hard to see the marshals waving those red flags at the side of the circuit. The message has been put across the drivers. They're coming in slowly, but day has almost turned into night.
It's yeah. So in the fog has well, in this area, it's often just low-lying cloud that swirls around, and one of those things with little wind that could actually last the rest of the day. On the other hand, it might just blow away within half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, an hour, and we are able to get the race underway again. So very difficult conditions. I never envy anybody who's involved in organising a race at the Nordschleife, because conditions you have to be so careful of around the whole of the circuit. But the snow, which seemed to have lifted when we actually got the start underway, has now returned with very much a vengeance and caused the race to be stopped, as the leaders were on their second lap, but with some of the cars further back not yet having completed their first racing lap.
Well, the race with a graphic at the screen as we look at cars coming back down the Dottinger Höhe. Very, very poor visibility. Race interrupted is the message. We saw the red flag come out as the lead group had gone onto its second lap, but these are the cars that are now coming back very, very slowly indeed. No green grass anymore. It's white around the edge of the circuits. The Eifel Mountains can produce snow as late as deep into May some years. I've been at the Nürburgring. I remember seeing a Formula 3000 race when they wouldn't let the cars out on their slicks in the snow. I was very, very underwhelmed by all of that, and that was, of course, just on the Grand Prix circuit, not the full Nordschleife. But it does look like something, you know, I think any person with petrol in their veins would have on the front of their Christmas card, image of choice. But right now, it's a case of getting the cars out on the circuit with the red flags being waved around the full distance of the Nordschleife, back to the pits to a modicum of safety. But drivers all being very careful indeed. We have had a few fallers. Certainly, we haven't seen the Get Speed Performance Mercedes get back to the pits. That was tail into the barriers. I suggest not a heavy impact by a very brief look at things, but the scope with a combination of the Nordschleife are now pretty much a full wet track at that end of the circuit. Not so much on the start-finish straight yet, but the far end of the circuit is very, very tricky indeed. Limping home.
I think the other concern, if I were race directing this, is how the conditions are going to improve, because even if the sun does break through, we're going to need a bit of a rise in temperature to get the water away, and certainly to get the snow on the grass verges to be melted.
Well, Paul, you brought up a point earlier. You were talking about the few runoff areas you have around the Nordschleife. It's one thing if it's grass. If it's wet grass, it's bad. If it's snow on top, it's even worse. So over the gravel traps, they effectively cease to exist when you have this level of extreme weather.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And I say that would be my concern, is how good the conditions are going to have to get in order to make it able to be restarted. I mean, they can get them onto wet tyres, which will certainly be more suitable for driving, but it wouldn't. Certainly the visibility, to my mind, isn't even good enough at the moment to get this race underway again.
No, we came into this event expecting flurries of weather. We didn't expect it to be warm. It's, after all, just mid-April in the Eifel Mountains. We didn't expect snow, and that certainly, I think, it's caught everybody on the hop. But red flags are being flown for a reason, and that is even as the last of the cars work their way back towards the security of the paddock, it's very, very hard to see. No wonder they're bringing them back as carefully as they possibly can. So great images if you want to just check out the live stream around the world, or carry on listening to us on RS3. The Teichmann Racing Porsche Cayman. We're enjoying the view through its windscreen, but I don't suppose the driver is particularly, A, because he wants to go racing, and B, just simply because it is so treacherous around the Nordschleife. And it really does emphasize how long the lap is, just the amount of time it's taking these cars to go back, and they haven't got as far yet as Galgen Kopf, so that it can get onto the relative simplicity of the Dottinger Höhe, the straight that brings you back to the end of the lap. It's tiptoe stuff. Again, looking at the surface. Paul, you talked about all sorts of parts having been resurfaced. This is an opportunity where you can see the joins in the resurfacing, where you can see the patches that contain the snow and the moisture from the snow better than others. But it's not just the falling of the snow. It's not just the water on the track. It's also slightly misty in there among the snow too. It's really compacting a lot of weather circumstances. The wind appears to have picked up since we came on air about an hour or so ago. Very, very difficult conditions. So yes. VLN 1 hit by fog, VLN 2 hit by snow. What's coming up for VLN 3?
Yeah, camels on the track. I think it's a combination of factors, isn't it, though, Bruce? It's not just the snow. I think the fog has really descended. This low-lying cloud has swept across and made life impossible for the race really to get underway again just at the moment. And still, I mean, you were saying this brings it home to you how long the circuit is. Cars still making their way around following the display of the red flag, 10 minutes ago, and they're still making their way around the circuit. And just double checking, there are, or there were, when the red flag was shown, still cars that were on their first lap. So therefore, this will count, if it gets restarted, as a completely new restart. It won't be a continuation. So there's not a situation in which they can have it as a shortened race. They're going to have to start it as a completely new race. And then if the race has to be shortened, then it'll be, if it gets to 2 3/4 hours. The reason the first race at VLN 1 was 2 3/4 hours, that's the minimum distance for scoring points. And so we'll have to get to the point where we can have a 2 3/4 hour race here this weekend as well, in order to make it a full point scoring round of the VLN Championship.
Yeah, those might seem like technicalities, but very well picked up, Paul, because it's a huge matter. And of course, if they're in race control, they're looking out the window. They can't exactly see what weather's coming their way, because the only weather they can see is the snowstorm that's flurrying around. Up around the pit lane isn't the point on the circuit where the snow and it's right on the edge of snow and rain at the moment, isn't it? Is causing the worst problems. That's the far end of the Nordschleife, the part where you really have to hang on and concentrate, but very, very hard to see. So indefinite period of race suspension, the red flag flying here over VLN 2, and for the marshals standing out around the circuit, we applaud them for being out there in all weathers, but I think now the last car has made their way around most parts of the circuit, they can hopefully stand back from the edge a little bit and get a bit of shelter, but again, just like I thought the last of the cars were coming in, some more headlights came into view, yes, coming at about 40 kilometres an hour towards the end of the lap.
Just as you think you've got everybody back, then you find you haven't got everybody back. And this, an issue as well, is going to be... I'd love to be able to send Joe Bradley down into the pits at this point, because he's got 180-something cars sitting in the pits, and there won't be room for him to move. It'll be absolutely chock-a-block down there.
And though you could do refueling here, of course, if it was a Creventic race, Joe would be in his shorts anyhow. So that'll be a lovely day for Joe. But the snow sitting on the rear wing, actually being shoveled off the top, that's good to see. Not the snow, but it's the Get Speed Mercedes. We saw it tail into the barrier. Providing they haven't got two cars, and I haven't caught myself out. Just check that's number 2, or is it the sister car?
I think it's the 23, that one, isn't it? Or
that could be the roast. Yes, that could be the Janine Hill, John Schaffner, yes, Fabian Schiller, one of the other camera cars.
which is also a Get Speed Performance entry, but sponsored by Rooster Rojo, J2 Racing. And I think that was the car that we were seeing there, the number 23 car, as opposed to the number 2, the full pro entry for Get Speed Performance.
So even as the cars gather in the pit lane, you can look at their front ends, and they've got snow affixed to the noses. It's just as they've been coming in. The number 80 Porsche being wheeled backwards and forwards. That's a car running in the SP7 class. That's Andreas Simonsen, Swedish racer, Patrick Kolb and Johannes Stengel. Car undamaged, which is good to see, but snow stuck to the front and starting to settle on the roof. Of course, the car no longer moving at any speed at all, but rather pleasingly being wheeled back into its pit garage to at least try and do something to keep the snow away. It's cold, it's wet, it's trying to snow, and it is snowing at various points around the track. But it's one of those really wet snow days.
Yes, it's one of those horrible, miserable ones where it gets into your bones. And yeah, with ambient temperature of only a couple of degrees Celsius and possibly less than that up in the mountains, and the dampness, it really does need warm coats and hot tea. But still, cars making their way into the Tiergarten, and
well, these are some of the front runners of Walkenhorst Motorsport.
Oh yes,
BMW. So these are some of the lead group.
Actually, on their second lap.
On their second lap. But actually, frankly, Paul, I'm quite disappointed. There aren't so many people sitting in the grandstands anymore. I feel the hardiness or foolhardiness as well as the hardiness quotient isn't quite what it normally is. But of course, if the red flag is flying, that's your opportunity. Plenty of things. They might have gone off to the museum or gone to get a coffee or somewhere in that main conference
or get down
centre.
Into the paddock, you see, because all the cars are now in the pit lane and you can get into the paddock. Yeah, still cars making their way back. Right. And only after we get them all back are we then going to be able to see what decision is made. The thing that concerns me slightly is that this shot that we're seeing at the moment, which I think is just coming off the end of the Dottinger Höhe, there has been very little improvement in the weather since the red flag was shown, and that's a good 20 minutes ago now, Bruce. So yeah. I just...
But this is the good end of the circuit in terms of weather. The far end is where the snow's settling. If you look at the grass on either side of Dottinger Höhe, we can see the grass around Exmuller, Bergwerk, and that sort of two-thirds of a distance, half a distance around the lap, that's where it's settling full-time.
Yes, and with the combination of the settling of snow and the fog, it really does mean that there's going to have to be a substantial improvement before we get the race underway. It's
visibility that is the key factor.
Exactly,
if it was the track is not as wet as a full wet racy day, but it's not far off, and the snow is just on the cusp of being rain. But it's the lack of visibility, particularly around the far end, and they're doing exactly the right thing to bring the cars in, because otherwise, frankly, it would be bedlam out there.
Yes, and I mean, with the temperatures so low, of course, the water on the track does become extremely slippery indeed. So cars continuing to find their way back home and into the pit lane.
And to give you a guide of the part of the circuit that has better visibility, there's a high camera angle looking at pit entry. In the background, you can just about make out the race control tower. There is the bridge over the straight, and you can only just make that out through the murk of the swirling snow. So it's not a case of being a little eager to bring them into the pits. It's an absolute essential moment in the race. Bring them off the circuit. And even on the Grand Prix loop now, the snow is starting to settle on the grass. It's turning from green to white. And we're going to await any further signals as to when racing is going to be underway. But quite frankly, Paul, they can't send them out anytime soon. The weather changed fast before the start of the race, but right now it seems to have settled in.
That's, as I say, you mentioned it right at the start. There wasn't a lot of wind, and times it did get gusty. But when there isn't a lot of wind, very often the cloud just gets itself into a little valley and settles there. And that seems to be what's happened at the Nürburgring this afternoon, with the race just into its second lap when the red flag was shown, and bringing matters to a conclusion after a great start, has to be said, from Jens Klingmann, and also from was it? It was Martin Tomczyk, wasn't it? Who
Yeah.
Eventually we discovered was at the wheel of the Schnitzer BMW, and he got himself into the lead, making the most of a second row of the grid start that had been achieved for him by Sheldon van der Linde. But the Schnitzer BMW then having got itself ahead of the Falcon BMW, those two cars being greeted by the red flag about halfway or a quarter of the way around their second racing lap.
The car that started on pole, Paul, Christopher Mies in the Land Motorsport Audi, we saw him overtaken, as you just mentioned, by Jens Klingmann going down into the opening corner. But I just noticed that's fallen back to fifth. So just as they got onto their second lap, it will have to go back the other way. Yeah.
Alles begann mit zwei Freunden und einer Vision. Unsere Initialen stehen für Qualität und Fortschritt. Wir schaffen den Technologietransfer von der Rennstrecke auf die Straße. Wir fertigen Gewindefahrwerke, Sportfedersätze, Stabilisatoren, Distanzscheiben und Gewindefedern. Zu 100% in Deutschland. Wir arbeiten mit Herzblut und Hingabe für diesen einen Moment. Wir sind Motorsport. Wir sind H&R.
Scroll down, obviously, with 183 starters. It could be a long way down the order, but that could be the faller. Anyhow, we will see. Start-finish straight with no cars on the track. The track is now whitening up as snow on the start-finish straight is settling with nothing to disturb it. And it doesn't look like the day we arrived to. certainly things change.
Yeah, I mean,
Andrew Siegler, thank you for letting me scroll down the screen, is in 68th position, so that's not his. Anyhow, there are some cars in other classes from Walker Horse Motorsport.
I think the live timing screen has about 4 cars out of the 183 that started that are not shown in the pits. I think all the rest are being shown as pits, but there are about 4 that haven't made it back. But of course, if the car has come back on the back of a flatbed, then that would also trigger the transponder saying that it's gone into the pits. But no, for the moment at least, we just have to sit and wait until we get further information about what's going to happen. But certainly, I see no prospect of getting this race underway for at least another half an hour. The weather conditions certainly now getting worse, although I suppose in a way the fact that there has been at least a change, a bit of a breeze now, we might be able to get something underway, but I think it would be not beyond the realms of possibility that race control considering abandoning this altogether. It's just coming up towards 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Germany, and normally the race would be finished at 4. So I suppose they've got until around about 2 to be able to get something underway. But if they're going to get something underway at 2 o'clock, they're going to have to make that decision before 1:30. So they've got about 40 minutes for decision time, I would say, Bruce.
Yeah, nobody comes to the Nürburgring without quite a good weather facility to check on what they're expecting. And certainly this morning we thought, yeah, there might be flurries of rain. The temperature seemed to suddenly dive, and what started just as the cars were on the grid, about 15 minutes before the start of the race, a little flurry of rain, and then in no time at all, I was thinking, is that turning to snow? We had a little hail, went through that metamorphosis, but who knows what their weather gods are going to be bringing us, but the teams will know. Race control will have a vague idea. They can't tell by looking out the window. Visibility has improved in the past few minutes on the start-finish straight, and if it sounds as though Paul and I are grasping at straws, we are to an extent, as much as anybody else is today. We're praying the race will get underway all over again, but the red flag flown just after the leading bunch of cars went onto their second lap. Conditions at the far end of the circuit, very, very tricky indeed. Not just wet track, but snow in the air, snow settling on the grass, very poor visibility. Few cars making contact with the barriers and possibly with each other. However, I'd say everybody's done a really good job, and race control have been right on it. That red flag being flown was absolutely the correct choice to make on the racing action, and it took a considerable amount of time to get the others back to the pits. Don't forget, 183 starters, and it was a very, very slow in-lap. The track is now wet. Certain points it's now being covered by light snow, but it's very wet snow, so that will, I suggest, melt fairly quickly, but it feels like ground zero. Further information will be announced when possible. The race is stopped. That's the latest graphic from race control. So it's the waiting game. We had a couple of cars, Paul, that decided from the SP9 class at the start of the field, from the top 10 qualifiers, that they would come in and start from the pits. That was the number 5 Phoenix Racing Audi of Vincent Kolb, Frank Stippler, and late addition Jamie Green, and the number 7 Conrad Motorsports Lamborghini of Michele Di Martino, who was the driver and Tom Coronel. They then went rocketing up through the pack, and just as they were starting to make progress from the tail of that pack, the snow came and their guns were spiked. But they'd played a very clever roll of the dice, and you feel didn't receive the pat on the back that they could well have done.
It's always a situation when you get races that are held in changeable conditions, because I always think, you see the rain coming, you dive for the pits, get yourself onto wet weather tyres, and then the race is stopped, and you end up losing the race because you made a wise choice, and the people who stayed out don't. So
you mean the people who stayed out and because they weren't on wet weather tyres crashed and brought an end to the race?
Yes, quite. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see on what happens on this one. No, I mean, the other thing which I thought was a tantalising possibility with the conditions as they were was the fact that the GT3 cars are completely the wrong thing to have in weather conditions like this. And what you could have seen was an SP7 class car or one of the other lower class cars really mixing it. Because if it would be a full 4 hours, because they have better fuel consumption, they can do one less pit stop over the course of the race. And you could actually see a right mix-up in the class pecking order, if you will. But you know, it's with the race being stopped, obviously, you know, all bets are off until we get an improvement. But I think, as I say, for the moment, it is just going to be a waiting game until we find out what race control can advise us.
Yeah, and I think they're very aware that if they make a decision 1 minute, a minute later, it could have changed all over again. That's been the story of this morning. Dry track for qualifying. René Rast took pole position and with a fantastic lap, 8 minutes, 0 seconds, 0.076 in the Monteplast Audi. That has fallen down in the running order with his teammate Christopher Mies at the wheel to 5th. But conditions went from spring sunshine to getting colder to arrival of rain. That turned into snow, and that turned into poor visibility. That produced the red flag. So it is a waiting game while race control and the race directors decide what they need to do. This VLN2, listening to me, Bruce Jones, and Paul Trustwell on RS3. Plenty of action for the Radio Show Limited broadcast this weekend. Today we've got on RS1, the Michelin Le Mans Cup qualifying and race, ELMS qualifying, and then, of course, all the IMSA action on RS2. So plenty of action. Sadly, not for us. But, Paul, you're a total optimist. The visibility is improving.
It's certainly improving. And one of my spies who's in the pit lane tells me that the weather is actually calming down on the Grand Prix track. But that probably just means that he's been given a woolly hat and another overcoat to wear. As we've mentioned a number of times before, I think the problem is that even if it does improve, there is no clear indication that I've had that it will then be improving for good, and that if all it does is improve just to come in again about half an hour later or an hour later, then there's no point in getting things underway. So they'll be looking not just at the weather conditions actually now at the Nordschleife where they are, but also what the forecast is looking like for the remainder of the afternoon, and hopefully they'll be able to give some guidelines, and we can just hope for wisdom.
Well, wisdom is a wonderful thing. I always hope to attain it, but the director of the TV show has decided we're not going racing anytime soon, and they're going to actually run on the live stream a documentary starting at the top of the hour in 2 minutes' time about Kissling Motorsport. So you will have something to watch. But that just goes to prove, I'm sure they could spike it if suddenly we go racing again. But just remember what we said at the start of the day. Rain coming in and out through the course of the day. Of course, we've not got rain. Well, we have. We've also got snow. So it's not as though we were expecting something this morning going to be clear this afternoon. So it could be snow all day.
And the problem is that the snow that is on the runoff areas isn't going to melt because it's not warm enough. The temperature is just barely above freezing point. So if the sun would come out, then even though we'd have the sun out, I don't think that snow is going to melt easily. And if I was in race control, I would be unhappy even running a race meeting where there is snow on the runoff areas for all the reasons we've already talked about. So, yeah, I'm not happy with this at all because I think we might have had it for the day. But there's that optimist in me. Well, if I was in the grandstand, I'd still be...
You would be going home. You'd be waiting.
I'd be waiting until we were told.
Yeah, gosh, just over a year ago, Goodwood members meeting, standing there in about minus 400 degrees, the wind cutting through, and yet the sight of people with snow flurrying and cars, Formula 5000 cars going out on slick tyres, that warms my heart.
And that was an event though, Bruce, wasn't it? I wasn't there, but there was snow on runoff areas and the racing continued.
Yeah. In fairness, I mean, Goodwood a very, very fast track, but they adjusted as much as they could. But you're further up here, altitude-wise. The track, your visibility lines around the Nordschleife are frequently very poor indeed, and they have to consider that. You have blind entries to corners.
And the other thing you have to consider, Bruce, is the
Nürburgring. With over 20 kilometers length, the racetrack, reverently called Green Hell, winds through the forests of the Eifel region. Opened in 1927, the Nürburgring quickly gained the reputation of being the most demanding racetrack in the world. Since then, the racetrack has been attracting daring racing drivers to beat it. The series, Racing in the Green Hell, is dedicated to those people who face the Nürburgring challenge and write history. Over 40 years of Kissling Motorsport. For more than 4 decades, the motorsport scene cannot be imagined without this racing team. From the beginnings in oval track racing, to the DTM, to the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the family racing team's history is diverse. They frequently participate in races in the Green Hell. They achieve countless victories and 4 VLN championship titles on the world's most challenging racetrack, making Kissling one of the most successful racing teams in VLN history to this day. The German Ruhr district is booming in the 1960s. Mining and steelworks shape the highly populated region. In the heart of the pot, a car brand is manufactured that perfectly goes with the spirit of the time: Opel. In the Rhineland town Oberhausen, young Helmut Kissling dares to take a step towards self-employment and motorsports. I became self-employed in 1968 and began doing motorsports in 1973. We built our own speedway cars. We've had some great successes. I was Dutch champion 3 times. Always with him on the racetrack, wife Ursula, daughter Claudia, and their sons Christian and Stefan. They've been with us from an early age, already in our speedway times. I remember those times. We have pictures of them at the age of 3 or 4 at the racetrack. Since then, they have been accompanying us. I got bitten by the motorsports bug when I was a teenager, so of course I always wanted to be there. And as I knew it from my parents' company, there was nothing else I wanted to do. I remember growing up in my parents' company and on the racetracks on the weekends, in Barlow, and there was another speedway track in Gelsenkirchen. These are my memories. Barlow, Gelsenkirchen, my parents' company. There has never been anything else for us but motorsports. Early on in his career, Helmut Kissling relies on Opel motors. But only many years later, he develops a closer connection to the brand with the famous lightning bolt emblem. In 1977, I managed to get a first connection to Opel. Then, for the first time ever, I was able to purchase motors at low costs. What follows is German tuning history. Together with Albrecht Wolf Mansell, Kissling Motorsport becomes one of the most sought-after tuning experts for the motors of the Rüsselsheim car manufacturer. Both street and racing customers trust Kissling's technology. When I think back to how it all began with the Cadet C and Manta, we've had a lot of business with those. On the racetrack, however, it's not as easy yet for the brand with the lightning bolt, circuit or endurance. When it comes to touring cars, the competition from neighboring Cologne is the best of the best at that time. We've had really tough competition with the escorts. In Group 1, there were 30 cars from Ford and 2 cars from Opel. We also won a couple of races, but at that point, they were just a bit smarter and a bit better. Also, because of the homologation, Opel just couldn't keep up yet. But things change rather quickly. In the years to come, Opel celebrates numerous successes on circuits and racetracks, not only with Kissling Motorsport. Also on the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the Kissling Opels always belong to the front runners. Whenever we had the opportunity, we would drive endurance races, sometimes with up to 6 cars. The special thing about it is the atmosphere, the whole setting and everything, but we didn't abandon the circuit racetracks, we were also still present there. In 1988, Kissling Motorsport enters the highest German touring car class, the DTM. It proves to be a difficult task with a tough competition. It was pretty bad. The beginnings were really lousy, I have to admit. We had several engine failures, drive damages, gearbox damages. We had everything you can imagine. In our group, we were the smallest with our little GSI. We had 270 horsepower in the 2-liter class. I'd say we could definitely attract attention. Already then, there is a close connection between Kissling Motorsport and the later head of Opel Motorsports, Volker Streichek, who is driving an Opel Kadett in the DTM. I've had the first contact with Volker Streichek in '86, I think. Volker was a top driver, already in his early years, and for me, I don't know how many years, 20 years or so, he was driving with me and for me. Even in my childhood, back when I was still rooting for him, he was already driving for us and in the DTM. He was always kind of a role model. Volker has been there since the beginning. In 1988, I was building the first DTM Kadett with Volker. I learned a lot from Volker in my youth, when I was not in the company. The cooperation and motorsports friendship have a lasting impact on Kissling Motorsport. Together, they do numerous projects. While their venture into DTM brings decent results, their race participations on the Nürburgring Nordschleife become more important in Kissling Motorsport's activities. The 24-hour race was a highlight for me as a child, so that's always stuck in my memory. I don't remember when exactly it was that I was walking around the track with my flashlight in hand and a friend in tow. I don't know how old we were when we started roaming around the area. I believe not even 10 years old. I know that after only 1 kilometer the battery went dead and we got lost somewhere in the forest and followed the noise of the motors to find our way back to the track. That's how it all started. The 24-hour race is really important to me. It's always the top event on the Nürburgring. I like the sheer number of participants, the whole surroundings. There are many, many fans on the track. That's something really special. It was always a special event for us, and we've always been there. From the early 90s onwards, the interests of brothers Christian and Stefan and their roles in their parents' company developed rather differently. Christian was never interested in becoming a driver. He wasn't the type to be a driver. Stefan, on the other hand, was hooked. Stefan was a good driver, and I was the one to get him to drive. That's how it has always worked out with our family. I developed everything together with Christian, built all the motors and so forth, did all the electrics. We did everything together, but Christian could do everything on his own too. The beginning of Stefan Kissling's racing career happens in no less a place than the Eiffel roller coaster surrounding the medieval Nürburgring. In 1993, I entered the Endurance Cup for the first time, Kadett E Group A. I got the opportunity because of Dr. Stallman, who'd been driving endurance races for a long time. I was allowed to drive a race with him in the Kadett, and in the same year, my first 24-hour race as well. It was great. I was totally inexperienced, unleashed on the pack. I really tried to let it all hang out because I wanted to prove something. I had enemy contact 1 or 2 times during my first year, although I brushed it off then, thinking it was everybody else's fault. Today, I know of course that it was 100% my fault, but I didn't want to see it then, so that's how my first year of race driving was. Stefan Kissling has special memories of his first 24-hour race as a driver. It was with an Opel Kadett and Dr. Stallman. Our windshield wiper broke rather quickly. There were no spare parts then. Changing the wiper motor would have taken too long in the 24-hour race, and there was heavy rain. I learned a lot for my later motorsports career. I remember the doc saying, cut up an apple and wipe the windshield with it. I asked him, why cut up an apple and wipe the windshield with it? It is water repellent. So that's what we did. With every pit stop, we wiped the windshield with the apple again. Thanks to the apple, we managed to drive the 24-hour race. True to the motto, no pain, no gain, their race participations are a double burden on the up-and-coming race driver and future CEO and boss of the team. I did everything in the car myself, prepared everything, and, as far as possible, also worked on the car at the racetrack. He always had these technical skills, I have to say. He developed the technical understanding immediately when he began with motorsports. Of course, it happened at times that we were fine-tuning until the very last minute, and I almost forgot my gloves and got behind the wheel with oil-smeared hands. When we got towards the starting grid, I was completely strung out, while everyone else had been mentally preparing for it, so I needed to take a breath first. The Endurance Trophy and the 24-hour race, Kissling Motorsport and Opel, both are indispensable combinations at that time. Everything new that Opel put on the market was immediately tuned and used by us. It was most important for me that we were able to be competitive. The competition was huge. His own driving career temporarily pulls Stefan Kissling away from the Nordschleifer in the following years. After his first attempts with the ADAC GT Cup and a title win in 1997, he is drawn to the highly competitive tuner racing series DTC. The DTC was a very defining time for me. The best time in my motorsports career. That was real motorsports for me. There were up to 40 cars in the starting grid. The car development was carried to extremes within the scope of the regulations. Every option was explored and tried on the racetrack. But as soon as the checkered flag was waved, we sat together with a lot of people in our trailers in the evenings, a really good group of people, barbecuing together with families and kids. It was a great time.
Familien und Kinder, und das war schön.
For the company Kissling Motorsport, the Nürburgring becomes more and more important by the late 90s. For years there's been a branch in the Eifel, but in 1998 they moved the entire company to the town of Bad Münstereifel, close to the ring. We had built this hall, had just moved in. It wasn't even finished yet, and then, one evening, the complete hall were on fire. I remember it well. We were at home when my father called. Apparently, someone who was driving by the hall had seen smoke. So my father said, "You have a fire extinguisher in your basement. Go grab it and drive to the hall." There was a firebug in the area at that time who had set fire to a couple of companies in the vicinity, and unfortunately we were one of them. We couldn't do anything with our fire extinguisher. I couldn't even get into the street as it was blocked by fire engines. I could see that the sky was lit by the firelight. Everything stood in flames. That was a bitter setback. We were left with nothing all of a sudden. My mother said that she wanted to quit then because we would have had to start from scratch again. But my father said, just as I know him, it has to go on, no matter how. It really wasn't open for debate. I slept on it for a night. The next morning, I rented the old company in Eickerscheid only a day later. There were 17 cars here that burnt that night in the hall, and all the material we had stored there, but one car remained. It was in a trailer outside, because we wanted to take it to test drives on the Nürburgring the next day. So what did we do? While everything was still smoldering here, the firefighters still at work, I took the race car and the 7.5-ton truck to the Nürburgring and did test drives. The fire damage is to be borne entirely by the Kisslings, as they have not taken out an insurance yet for the new hall. But the Kisslings bounce back, roll up their sleeves, and get to work again. It was to give up or go all out at that point. Our characteristics at that time were go all out. The following years proved the Kisslings right, especially after the turn of the millennium. Kissling Motorsport was a force to be reckoned with in the fight for the championship on the Nürburgring endurance track. In 2001, former cross-country cycling world champion Klaus-Peter Thaler and Heinz Rehmann, company founder of H&R Special Springs, win the popular title on the Nordschleife in an Opel Astra F. Only 2 years later, they managed the feat of winning the VLN championship title again. This time it is the twins, Heinz Otto and Jürgen Fritsche, who win the title. The brothers Fritsche and Kissling Motorsport, that's a story in itself. Early on in their company's history, the two brothers from Hukeswagen are on the racetracks together with Kissling Motorsport. In 1993, Heinz Otto Fritsche and Roland Zenger win the first VLN title with and for Kissling Motorsport. We've had highs and lows. We cried and we screamed and so on. But we made it.
Das hat natürlich auch den Motorsport geprägt.
It left an imprint on motorsports as well. The whole package. I believe it was unbeatable at that time. Also, because of the friendship we had built. We always wanted to win the championship, and we achieved it several times with the two of them. But these extremely ambitious drivers who worked their whole life for it poured everything into it. They don't know anything else besides motorsports. You don't find that a second time. In 2007, the twins manage yet another title win together with Marco Wolf. Heinz Otto and Jürgen Fritsche become record-holding champions, undefeated until this day. But the VLN's success cannot belie the fact that the cooperation with the car manufacturer from Rüsselsheim is not getting any easier. Remedial measures, job cuts, the withdrawal from the DTM. Opel is stuck right in the middle of a crisis. We have been working with Opel for over 40 years now. I don't think many others, especially in motorsports, can say about themselves to be so loyal to a brand and vice versa as Opel and Kissling Motorsport are. There are always good and bad times. For Opel, as for any other manufacturer, I think in the end we absolutely made the right choice.
Kissling und Opel gehören zusammen.
Kissling and Opel belong together. That's just how it is. It has always been like that. That was our mindset, and it still is today. This is how Opel feels about it at that time as well. Despite all their struggles, the idea is born for a new motorsports casting format, including racing commitments. The OPC Race Camp.
OPC
Race Camp was a whole new experience for me. You've got to hand it to him. Manuel Reuter really put emphasis on the fact that it was not just about the show, which of course had to happen for TV, but about finding the best talents. At this time, in Bad Münstereifel, several extraordinary racing cars are manufactured based on production cars, not designed for the Nordschleife and nearly undrivable. There is the Opel Speedster, fueled by a 2.5-litre Calibra ITC engine. With the Corvette C6, Kissling fights for overall victories in the Endurance Championship between 2007 and 2009, but the classification combined with the recently introduced GT3 regulations outbreak the 8-cylinder racing car. Only one VLN podium is won in the end. The Corvette VLN project is finished. As it often happened in the history of Kissling Motorsport, the focus in the following years is, among others, on the Fritsche brothers. In the next years, they win numerous class titles and even more respect from their opponents on the track. But for their 5th championship title, they are lacking participants and thus points in their class. The next big project for the brand with the lightning bolt emblem is setting up the Opel Astra OPC Cups within the VLN. For this brand trophy, more than 30 racing cars need to be built and maintained with help, advice and spare parts during the season. From 2013 to 2016, the Cup enhances the starting grid of the Endurance Championship and makes for spectacular moments with hard-fought duels. For Christian Kissling, these years are also a time of parting from the parental company. After 24 years, he leaves Bad Münstereifel and Kissling Motorsport. I have been doing motorsports since I was 16 years old. Have always been everywhere in the world. I decided that I needed to do something new. After I came to the classic Porsche restoration in Aschaffenburg, it was clear for me that this is what I was going to do. Kissling Motorsport keeps on working closely with Opel. When the touring car class TCR wins out internationally, Opel decides to offer a car for both national and international competitions. Their concept and build happens in Bad Münstereifel.
Ja, war eine riesen Herausforderung.
It was a huge challenge. We were new. The other manufacturers had been there for 2 years already.
Es gab viele Sachen in der VLN.
There were many great things about the VLN time. But because I was part of this project, the title win in the TCR Germany at the end was the greatest for me.
Also am schönsten.
2017 proves to be a difficult year for the Kissling family. For decades, Ursula Kissling keeps the family together and organizes business matters in the background. Her death leaves a void. Only a short time before that, on top of it all, Helmut Kissling has a stroke. My wife had always been with me, and if she hadn't, I wouldn't have made it. Never. We had been together for 50 years, and then she died. After my mum died 2 years ago, and my father had a stroke at the same time, that was the point. It could only get worse. It can only go downhill from there. There was a great solidarity in our family business. From this point on, you can only go forward. You have to have that motivation to go with the changes. In addition to these private blows of fate, the Kissling anniversary is also a year with entrepreneurial difficulties. General Motors sells their Opel shares to French PSA Group. All plans regarding future Opel Motorsports activities are open. It is hard to celebrate Kissling's 40-year company history under these impressions, but their motto still is, the show must go on. On the Nürburgring Nordschleife, the Opel Astra TCR participates in a race for the first time. Driving it are two longtime companions, Volker Streichek, together with Kissling test driver Anu Luostaranen. In September 2017, the company's anniversary is celebrated with this car at the Nürburgring. The touring car is a highlight on the track and wins further class titles for the traditional team. Considering the events of the past few years, they think about quitting all their activities for the first time. Helmut and Stefan Kissling ultimately decide not to keep the business going. I am 76 years old, and at some point you have to say it's knocking off time.
Der richtige Zeitpunkt.
The right time for us was when we, as a family, decided that it wasn't working out for us anymore the way it used to. You have to be ready to give 100% for the business in order for it to have a future. We reached the point when we knew we just weren't willing to give it that anymore. When you reach that point, it's the best time to quit, because no matter what you do, 50% or 80% just won't do in the future. That's how I see it too, and have seen it 5 years ago. I think for Stefan, it is time for something new. It's a pity because of the fans, of course, but it is just time.
Die Opel-Fan-Gemeinschaft.
The Opel fan community was always the best for me, especially in my active time. There is a really nice fan stand block close to the Hohe Acht at the 24-hour race. I don't know if it is still there, but it has been for years, decades, and every time I was driving in the 24-hour race, I could hear their horns before I came up to the Hohe Acht. The guys could tell by the sound of our motors that we were coming, and they started making noise, and I would hear it in my car. It was amazing. For more than 4 decades, motorsport has both demanded everything from the Kisslings and given them everything. We had the best staff, long-term employees, which were with us for over 20, 25 years. People you can go through thick and thin with. And we did go through thick and thin with them. They become a part of the family, a part of the Kissling family. For me personally, I spend more time and experienced more with our staff than with my own family. Now, a new chapter is about to begin in their lives. Of course, it has to go on for me. I just need to let it all sink in for a bit. Now, In this quieter time, I have caught myself a couple of times thinking, even if it was just a guest start, you could do another race again. Just get in a car again.
Out of the darkness and into the fire. Out of the darkness and into the fire. History's waiting into the hands of fate. While destiny waits in the fire. This is my time to seize my chance to
Cars were starting their second lap, and the first the SP9s were making their pits to change tyres, I was still thinking another lap was worthwhile. Unfortunately, I opened my mouth and had that thought come out, so I can't call it back in. But it was what happened over the next minute or two that really, really changed, brought out that red flag, the way the visibility went to nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. advice coming through that parts of the track still has much snow.
Very much snow.
Try to, yes,
which is more.
Is more. Very much snow is more. Yes.
Yeah.
But,
and again, looking at the images of the start-finish straight, it looks as though it's just been a wet track and it's drying. In fact, pit exit, you can almost see dry circuit. So the sun is shining on that, but the snow we saw at the far end that left us with no grass around the circuit, only snow, and is clearly still there.
And yeah, we need to know the sun is shining, temperatures still barely above freezing.
Watch the clock, Paul, because they will decide apparently race control within the next 30 to 40 minutes, which will take it past what should have been the midpoint in the race, about whether the race is going to be restarted. Red flag.
Wir sind Motorsport. Wir sind H&R.
The season, including warm sunny days for the races that run in August and September. But
they're the ones that stick in the mind. You tend to forget the rainy ones, but you know they're out there somewhere in the VLN. I think your concept of possibly taking over the Nürburgring 24-hour qualification race is a sensible one, because the calendar's really pretty jammed.
Yeah, and
as it is with the 9 rounds.
And the other aspect to it, of course, is the big one, the Nürburgring 24 hours, which does eat into the VLN calendar in a certain way, but also gives the entrants an opportunity to pre-qualify for the top 40 shootout by finishing in the top positions within a VLN race. Now, if you don't have the VLN race, then of course you don't get that opportunity. although qualifying did happen. Qualifying did take place this morning, and so we had a full qualifying session to set the grid positions, and that also contributes to Nürburgring 24 hours. But we were saying earlier on, Bruce, I mean, the whole status of the Nürburgring 24 hours, I mean, it's one of those events that's been running for a long, long time, but it's as high a profile now as it's ever been. I mean, time was when it was a race run predominantly for Caterhams and Lotus 7s back in the 60s. But it's then progressed from that to being a full kind of saloon car specials into being what it is now.
Yes, I mean, back in the days of the FIA European Touring Car Championship that metamorphosed into the World Touring Car Championship, absolutely tip-top, tin-top
yes,
action there. And the pits and pit lane were as packed as they are now. It's still the complexion of the race, the makeup of the race keeps on changing. But I would say at the moment its star has been very much in the ascendancy for the past half dozen years, and it shows no sign of abating. In fact, more and more global awareness. And for the manufacturers who come and take their supercars to set really fast laps around the Nordschleife, it has even more resonance. You were talking earlier, I can't remember if it was on air or off air, about how the Nürburgring Nordschleife, lots of young gamers have been, was that on air? I can't remember, had been awakened to the charms and of this circuit and didn't realise it was for real. By golly, it's for real, and it's never proved itself more real than it has this morning.
No, it was one of those conversations that I read rather than one that I actually participated in, but it was literally a story of an American gamer talking about the fact that he had this circuit called the Nordschleife. This is going back 15 years probably, and talking about the fact that he had this circuit on his computer and what a brilliant circuit it was, and only what a shame it was that it didn't exist in real life. And the reply came through, actually, it does exist in real life, and they do race on it, and there is a 24-hour race on it. Think about that. And as I say, the total awareness of this circuit, which, as I say, I mean, it used to hold the German Grand Prix. It used to hold the Nürburgring 1,000 kilometers. It used to be part of the fabric of world motorsport. Then it didn't anymore because the new Grand Prix loop was built, the Neue Nürburgring was built, and everybody kind of assumed that, much like the back of Hockenheim, the back of the Nordschleife had just been left to rack and ruin, but it never was. It was always still used for something, and a lot of that, Bruce, goes back to what you were saying earlier on, is the industry wanting to use the Nordschleife for what it was built for in the first place, to test out their brand.
Yes, that element has never been more so. The good news is we've got cars leaving the pit lanes. We've got
this is highlights.
Oh, it's highlights, of course, of race one. I was busy, so engrossed in our conversation. Yes, but these are highlights from earlier today now being put out on the VLN.de, live streaming on the website. And we had fallers even on the formation lap. Deformation lap.
It was just as the cars were coming out onto their formation lap that the snow started. Before the cars were let out of the pits, it was bright sunshine, and we then were informed that the start would be delayed while the race control took a look out on the far side of the circuit.
But at that point, when they started investigating, it was still not too bad. It was just rain on the edge of snow on the start-finish straight, but then in no time at all, suddenly the visibility just came down and down and down. So they delayed the start by 15 to 20 minutes and thought, okay, it's eased off, let's go racing. And it didn't look too bad on the opening lap. We had a couple of spinners down at the tail of the leading group, but as they made their way round to start the race, it was sunshine. But yes, we were still getting cars going around, and that just echoed the fact that it was still wet offline. Wet from a flurry of rain they couldn't see on the start-finish straight. When we got to the start, the Falcon Motorsport BMW roared into the lead and seemed to be pulling clear. One of the Lamborghinis went off. That was the number 20 car. Renault Clio had a little bash up the tail end. But generally, it was all good, clean stuff on a pretty much a dry track. But moments later, around the far end of the circuit, it was full wet. The red flags were pulled out very, very quickly indeed because it was a lack of visibility. But the fact was, as number 930, the KTM Crossbow went for a second spin, while the cars from the middle pack of the three were experiencing really, really grim weather around the back of the circuit. The ones at the front of the field, it was still relatively dry. They went on to start their second lap, but then the red flag was flown soon after that, long before the second of the three groups came to take the start their second lap, so they were able to pull off, and it took forever to get the rest of the cars back around the circuit. Number 2 Mercedes went for a spin, unfortunately, and sat with its tail to the barriers.
But you could see just how bad the conditions were getting as well with the fog. And this was not snow causing the problem, Bruce, as much as lack of visibility. We talked about it. The fog descended. There was a big, heavy cloud that just came over and descended upon the circuit, making visibility absolutely impossible on the run back. And remember, on the Dottinger Höhe, you're doing in excess of 200 kilometers an hour. And you don't want to be doing that when you can't see more than 40, 50 yards ahead of you.
Yeah, the final sort of half, maybe the final third of the lap was where the fog was really, really hanging. And of course, that does include the Dottinger Höhe. But you need your sight lines through the twisting corners before that. And the good news is those sight lines have come back, at least in the area of the circuit around the Grand Prix loop. The cloud is lifting, but as ever with the Nordschleife, you have to consider what's happening in the far beyond. So we're waiting for decisions from race control. May wait a little longer, but the clouds have started to roll away. We've actually got blue sky now, not just sun trying to come through. So conditions are changing, but I just got to reiterate again that the weather forecast for today was weather blowing in and out. We thought it might be little flurries of rain, nothing rare about that on the Nordschleife at this time of year. We were ready for that. We weren't ready for the snow. We certainly weren't ready for the fog. And race control absolutely doing the right thing in terms of throwing that red flag, because conditions, I've almost never seen conditions go downhill as fast as they did this morning.
Indeed, and the problem was, of course, that it wasn't just difficult conditions, it was seriously dangerous conditions, and with cars on slick tyres. I mean, I was put in mind of the Nürburgring 24 hours of 4 or 5 years ago when we had a hailstorm in the middle of May, can you believe, and the climb up towards the carousel became so treacherous that you had GT3 cars just spinning their wheels trying to get up the hill and not managing it because they'd had this hailstorm. And at that point, the race had to be stopped as well. But because it was May, it was that much warmer ambient conditions, you couldn't see them not being able to restart. You know, there was just a general warmth about the place where it just was wet, whereas this is proper wintry conditions that we have here. We'll see what happens, and hopefully we will be able to get something underway again, because as you say, although there are clouds about at the moment, the Nürburgring bathed in sunshine.
But ambient temperature has not been lofty today, so it's going to take quite a long time to dry out, even with full sun. Wind appears to have dropped, but right now we can't tell when they get going again, if indeed they get going again, because it's they've got to be confident that the weather's going to be sufficiently benign. I think rain is okay, that's fine, we can deal with that, we've dealt with it many, many times, but they've got to be sufficiently confident to put the show back on the road, and right now we're still waiting for any comment.
I think part of the problem as well is going to be whether, you know, what happens if it would be sunny like this, and then we had another of those snow flurries. You would have again cars on slick tyres on a track which is suddenly becoming wet, and I think it's that sudden change. If there is another sudden change, that's what they really, really want to avoid at all costs. So there is a hiatus for VLN2 at the Nürburgring Nordschleife with the middle of April, and we've got the weather you might have expected more in February or even early March. What had been a bright sunny morning, albeit cold, has become very difficult. And I think you're absolutely spot on there, Paul. It's not just the changing of the weather, it's who's on which tyres when, if indeed any further really awful weather hits the circuit. Right now it's all looking fairly fine, and waiting for any signal from race control. All the cars are either in the paddock or in the pit garages, trying to keep dry. A few are having little bits of bodywork repair done to them. There are a few knocks and scrapes around that opening lap, including also the formation lap. But of course, being a new race, because the first part of the race won't count at all, it doesn't matter what they do to the cars. They won't have been in part ferme conditions for the last how long ago? Almost 2 hours. They won't have been in part ferme conditions, so they will have been being worked on and refettled practically into brand new cars if necessary in some cases. We did notice that Clio, there was a Porsche that had damage at the front, and so where work needs to have been done, it will have been able to be done.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take a further break because in fact, the news has just come through that the red flag was the final flag of the day. VLN 2 has been cancelled because further adverse weather is expected. It's cold, it's wet off the racing line. And I'm afraid, I think maybe in many ways it's difficult when we're looking at sunshine and broken clouds, but they've taken the decision, Paul, to call it quits for today. I think that also comes around to the mathematical numbers we were working towards about how much time you would have had to run a race in which you can score points.
I think, yes, to get a full points race in. And the VLN, I must admit, when I first started getting involved with the VLN, I didn't realize quite what such a big deal the championship itself is. And I had a conversation with some people involved with BMW actually when they were upgrading from the 235i to the M240i, and they were telling me that the whole VLN was so crucial to their entire marketing process. And you know, this is BMW. Remember, it's not as if BMW aren't involved in other forms of motorsport. They're involved in in sports car racing, in world championship racing around the world. But the VLN is crucial to their marketing strategy, and so to upgrade the 235i to the 240i was very, very important to them. So the VLN is a big thing, and it won't have been a matter to be considered lightly for the race control to cancel the race, to effectively abandon the race meeting after less than one full racing lap.
So much as Paul and I would have loved to have commentated through 4 hours of fierce and furious racing action around the mighty Nürburgring Nordschleife, I'm afraid it has been beaten by the weather today, and alas, the race will not be restarted. Hopefully we'll have further news for you through the week ahead about if there will be a rescheduled event through the year, if the Nürburgring 24-hour qualification race will become a round of the VLN. But for now, what we're going to do, we're going to cut away. But do not leave RS3 because we've got a Super GT preview. Of course, all the action kicking off very soon. And that will follow right now, coming next on RS3. So from Paul Truswell and me, Bruce Jones, we've been thwarted today. We will be back. But thank you for joining us. Next time, we'll give you more racing.